The snow fell silent over Montana, the way it always did in December. Thomas Mercer stood in his workshop, hands steady despite the cold, fitting a new trigger assembly into a Remington 700. The rifle belonged to a rancher from Billings, a man who needed reliability when putting down injured livestock. Clean kills, merciful work, the kind of shooting that let Thomas sleep at night. 58 years had etched themselves into the lines around his eyes, deepened the weathering of his face until he looked like the mountains themselves. Gray streaked through what remained of his dark hair, earning him the nickname that stuck since Iraq. Gray Mercer, the gunsmith who never missed, the Marine who came home. The brass bell above his shop door chimed. Two Marines stood in the entrance, dressed blues perfect despite the December wind. Snow melted on their covers. The younger one, a corporal, carried a folded flag. The older one, a gunnery sergeant with 3 rows of ribbons, held a small wooden box. Thomas knew what they carried before they spoke. A father always knows. The flag was heavy in his hands, heavier than it should have been. 13 folds of honor. The wooden box contained a Navy cross, the ribbon still crisp, never worn. The citation read like all the others Thomas had seen over 40 years of war. Extraordinary heroism, conspicuous gallantry, complete devotion to duty. Beautiful words that meant a son would never come home. Captain David Mercer, Navy SEAL, killed in action, Syria, November 28, 2024. Training accident during classified operations, age 32. The gunnery sergeant's voice was professional, rehearsed, kind. He had delivered this speech before. He would deliver it again. The words washed over Thomas like rain, and he heard none of them. Instead, he heard David at 8 years old, asking why Grandpa's rifle had a different scope than everyone else's. He heard David at 16 making his first 1,000-yard shot and whooping like he'd won the Super Bowl. He heard David at 25, the day he earned his trident, saying the only words that ever mattered. I want to be like you and Grandpa, Dad. I want to stand between the bad things and the good people. The Marines left. The flag sat on Thomas's workbench next to the rifle he'd been repairing. Outside, Montana was silent. Inside, Thomas Mercer stood alone in his workshop, holding his son's medal, and felt nothing at all. The funeral was 3 days later. Arlington National Cemetery in winter looked like a painting, all white marble and dark trees against gray sky. The honor guard performed with mechanical precision. 7 Marines who had never met David but honored him anyway. The chaplain spoke about sacrifice and service and eternal rest. Fellow SEALs came, stone-faced men in dress uniforms who shook Thomas's hand and said David was the best of them, that he saved their lives more than once, that he died doing what he loved. Thomas heard the lies beneath their words. SEALs didn't die in training accidents, not ones like David, not ones who could shoot a cigarette out of a man's mouth at 600 yards, not ones who had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Syria already. Something was wrong with the story, had been wrong from the moment those Marines appeared in his workshop, but grief was not the time for questions. The 21-gun salute cracked across the cemetery like thunder. Thomas watched the flag fold, watched it pass from hand to hand, watched it finally rest in his lap. Somewhere behind him, David's ex-wife cried. They had divorced 2 years ago, unable to bear the strain of deployments and secrets and the slow erosion of normal life. She had wanted David to quit, to come home, to be safe. Thomas had never blamed her for that. The crowd dispersed slowly. Old Marines, young SEALs, family members. Thomas barely recognized. He sat alone by the grave, snow beginning to fall again, and remembered teaching David to shoot when the boy was 12. The same way Thomas's father had taught him. The same way Ghost Mercer had taught his son in the woods of North Carolina before Vietnam swallowed him whole. 3 generations of Mercers, 3 generations of warriors, and now Thomas was the last. A hand touched his shoulder. Thomas looked up into the face of Lieutenant Marcus Webb, one of David's SEAL teammates. Webb was young, maybe 28, with the hard eyes of someone who had seen too much too soon. He wore his dress blues like armor. His right hand was bandaged. Marcus's voice was quiet, barely audible over the wind. We need to talk. Not here, not now, but soon. Thomas stood, joints protesting the cold and the stillness. When? Tonight. The Hilton in Arlington, room 412. Come alone. Marcus's eyes held something Thomas recognized, something he had seen in mirrors after Fallujah, after Mogadishu, After all the places where good men died for complicated reasons. Marcus Webb was afraid. David wanted you to have something if anything happened to him. Marcus pressed a small object into Thomas's palm. It was a USB drive, matte black, unmarked. Then Marcus was gone, disappearing into the crowd of mourners like smoke. Thomas closed his fist around the drawer and felt its weight, insignificant and enormous at the same time. The Hilton room was anonymous, identical to 10,000 other hotel rooms across America. Beige walls, generic art, the smell of industrial cleaning solutions and old cigarettes. Marcus Webb sat in the room's single chair, still in his dress blues, looking like he had not slept in days. Thomas stood by the window, watching snow fall over Arlington, the USB drive heavy in his pocket. "You need to see what's on that drive," Marcus said. "But first, you need to understand something. What the Corps told you about David's death, the training accident, all of it is bullshit." Thomas had known this, had felt it in his bones since the moment those Marines appeared in his workshop. But hearing it confirmed brought a cold rage that settled low in his gut, familiar and dangerous. How did he die? Marcus looked away, jaw working. "We were running an operation in Syria. Classified. Can't tell you details, but it was straightforward. Intel gathering on weapons shipments crossing the border from Iraq. David was our overwatch, posted up on a ridgeline about 1,000 yards from the target compound. Routine stuff. We'd done it 100 times. And someone put a bullet through his scope." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Perfect shot. Entered through the objective lens, went straight through into David's eye. He died instantly. Whoever made that shot knew exactly what they were doing." Thomas felt something shift inside him. Some part of himself he had buried 20 years ago, when he retired from the Marines, when he decided that enough blood had been spilled, that he could be a father and a gunsmith instead of a weapon. That part was waking up now, stretching, remembering what it was built for. Counter sniper? That's what we thought at first. But here's the thing. Marcus leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. The shot came from 1,800 meters, through darkness, with wind gusts up to 20 miles per hour. That's not just good, Mr. Mercer. That's impossible. That's the kind of shot maybe 10 people on Earth could make. Thomas processed this information, running calculations in his head automatically. 1,800 meters in desert wind conditions required perfect reading of mirage, temperature differential, Coriolis effect, required equipment that cost more than most cars, required decades of practice, required someone who lived and breathed precision, shooting the way other people breathed air. Required someone like Ghost Mercer, someone like Thomas himself. "The USB drive," Thomas said quietly. "What's on it?" Marcus stood, moved to the window beside Thomas. For 3 months before he died, David was investigating something. He didn't tell command, didn't file official reports, but he kept detailed logs, personal files. He found something in those weapons shipments, something that scared him, something that connects to your father. "My father died in 1975. I know." Marcus turns to face Thomas directly. David spent his last month going through classified archives about Operation Tailwind, Phoenix Program, MACV-SOG operations in Laos and Cambodia. He was obsessed with finding information about a Soviet sniper who operated in Southeast Asia during the war. Someone called the Chechen. Thomas went very still. That name. He had not heard it in 40 years, had not thought about it in nearly as long, but it was there, buried in childhood memories, in fragments of conversations overheard when his father came home on leave, in whispered stories told by Ghost Mercer's teammates at reunions and funerals. The Chechen was a ghost story, a legend that special operations soldiers told each other in the dark. A Soviet Spetsnaz sniper who hunted American snipers in Vietnam and Laos, who killed from distances that made other marksmen look like amateurs, who disappeared into the jungle like his namesake and left only bodies behind. Ghost Mercer had spoken of him exactly once, 3 days before his final deployment to Laos, and young Thomas had listened from the hallway outside his father's study. "There's a Russian out there, son. The best I've ever faced. If something happens to me, remember this. Some wars never end. They just wait." Thomas realized Marcus was watching him, waiting. "You knew about the Chechen." "My father mentioned him once, a long time ago." David thought the Chechen killed Ghost Mercer in Laos. Marcus's voice was gentle, like he was explaining something to a child, and he thought the Chechen was still active, still operating. David found evidence in those weapons for shipments, serial numbers, and manufacturing marks that matched stockpiles from the Soviet era. He thought someone was selling old Cold War arsenals to insurgent groups, and he thought the Chechen was running the operation. Thomas turned this information over in his mind, looking for flaws in the logic, finding none. If the Chechen was real, if he had survived Vietnam and 40 years of subsequent wars, he would be old now. 70, maybe older. But age did not diminish skill for a sniper. Some abilities only sharpened with time. The drive, Thomas said again. Show me. Marcus pulled a laptop from his bag, thin and modern, military issue. He inserted the USB drive and stepped back. You need to see this yourself. David's last entry was recorded 2 days before he died. He knew something was wrong. He knew someone was watching. The video file opened. David's face filled the screen, tired and drawn, filmed in what looked like a barracks room. Behind him, Thomas could see David's rifle propped against the wall, the same M40A5 that Thomas had helped him customize 3 years ago. The timestamp read November 26, 2024, 2 days before his son died. David's voice was steady but quiet, the voice of someone who knew they might be overheard. Dad, if you're watching this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I tried to do this through official channels, but there's something wrong here. Something bigger than I understood. On screen, David pulled out a folder, opened it to show documents covered in redaction marks. For 3 months, I've been tracking weapons shipments through Syria. Standard stuff, except the weapons are too old. Cold War-era Soviet stockpiles, rifles and ammunition manufactured in the 1970s and 80s. Someone's been sitting on these weapons for 40 years and selling them now. David's expression hardened. I traced the serial numbers back through CIA databases. These weapons were originally shipped to Laos and Cambodia during the Vietnam War, supplied to communist forces. And here's where it gets weird, Dad. Some of these weapons were reported destroyed in 1975, right after the fall of Saigon, destroyed in an operation called Phantom Strike. Thomas felt ice crystallize in his veins. Phantom Strike, another name he had not heard in 40 years. Another fragment of his father's history, whispered between ghost old teammates, never fully explained. On screen, David continued, I found Grandpa's name in the Phantom Strike files. He led the operation. 12 MACV SOG operators went into Laos in December 1975 to destroy a Soviet weapons cache and eliminate a high-value target. The official report says the mission was successful, target neutralized, weapons destroyed. But here's the thing. David leaned closer to the camera. 11 men came back. Grandpa didn't. And the weapons were never destroyed. Someone moved them. Someone hid them for 40 years. David glanced over his shoulder, checking the door, then looked back at the camera. I think the high-value target from Phantom Strike is still alive, Dad. I think the Chechen survived, and I think he's been running black market weapons operations ever since. And I think he knows I'm onto him. The video showed David pulling out a photograph, holding it up to the camera. It was old, faded, printed on the cheap paper used by military intelligence in the 70s. The image showed a man in Soviet military fatigues, face partially obscured by shadows, standing beside a Dragunov sniper rifle. Someone had written a name on the back in marker. Mikhail Volkov, the Chechen. David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Yesterday, someone took a shot at our compound, missed me by inches. The trajectory analysis puts the shooter at 1,700 meters, elevated position, at night. Nobody shoots like that, Dad. Nobody except family. I think the Chechen knows who I am. I think he knows I'm Ghost Mercer's grandson. And I think he's coming for me the way he came for Grandpa. On screen, David set down the photograph and looked directly into the camera. His eyes were his father's eyes, were Ghost's eyes, the same gray-blue that Thomas saw in his own mirror every morning. If anything happens to me, you need to know this isn't random. This is personal. This is old business, older than me, older than you. This goes back to Laos and Phantom Strike and whatever really happened there. David reached forward, about to turn off the camera, then stopped. One more thing, Dad. I left something for you in my personal effects. Grandpa's old footlocker, the one you never opened. I found it in storage at Mom's place after the divorce. I think there are answers in there. I think Grandpa knew this might happen someday. The video ended. Marcus closed the laptop quietly. That was the last time I saw him alive. 2 days later, someone put a bullet through his scope from 1,800 meters. In the dark. In the wind. Exactly the kind of shot David was describing. Thomas stood at the window, watching snow fall over Arlington, over his son's fresh grave, over the city full of monuments to dead men and old wars. Inside him, something vast and cold was taking shape, something he had tried to kill with alcohol and work and the quiet life of a gunsmith in Montana. It was the part of himself that Ghost Mercer had forged, the part that understood war was never really over, that some debts could only be paid in blood. "Where's my father's footlocker?" Marcus pulled keys from his pocket, old brass keys that looked like they belonged to another era. David had it shipped to a storage facility in Alexandria. Unit 247. I have the address. Thomas took the keys. Their weight was insignificant. Their meaning was enormous. "Thank you for showing me this, Lieutenant." Thomas's voice was steady, calm, the voice of a man who had made a decision. "You should go now. Forget this conversation. Forget the USB drive. You have a career to think about." Marcus met his eyes, and Thomas saw the guilt there, the weight of survival when brothers died. "With respect, Mr. Mercer, David was my friend. If there's something I can do to help, anything at all, you just need to ask." Thomas considered this. Considered the young SEAL's earnest face. Considered what help might cost this kid in the long run. "I'll remember that. Now go, get some sleep. You look like hell." After Marcus left, Thomas sat in the hotel room's single chair and held the USB drive in his palm. Outside, Washington, D.C. was going about its business. Monuments lit against the night sky, tourists and politicians and normal people living normal lives. None of them knew that wars never really ended, that old ghosts walked among them, that some debts transcended generations. Thomas pulled out his phone and made a call he had not made in 20 years. The number was still programmed in, muscle memory from another life. It rang 4 times before a rough voice answered. "This is Hayes. Bulldog, this is Gray Mercer." Silence on the line, stretching long enough that Thomas wondered if the old sergeant major would hang up. Then quietly, "Ghost boy. Heard about David. I'm sorry, son. He was a good operator. He was murdered." Another silence. When Hayes spoke again, his voice was harder. "You sure about that?" "I'm sure, and I need your help." Hayes breathed heavily into the phone. Thomas could picture him, probably sitting in some contractor office at Fort Bragg, still training young shooters, even though he was 62 and had earned retirement a dozen times over. Ron Hayes had been Ghost Mercer's spotter in Vietnam, had been there at the end, had carried that weight for 50 years. "What kind of help are we talking about, Gray?" "The kind that ends old wars." Hayes was quiet for his long moment. "Then the Chechen? How did you know?" "Because I've been waiting for this call for 50 years. Hayes's voice carried no surprise, only a weary acceptance. "Your father made me promise something before we went into Laos on Phantom Strike. Made me swear that if anything happened to him, I'd tell you the truth when the time came. Guess the time's come." "Tell me, not over the phone. You need to come to Bragg. Bring whatever David left you. And Gray," Hayes paused, "when you hear what I have to say, you're going to want to do something stupid. I'm asking you now, as your father's friend, don't do it alone. I'll be there tomorrow." Thomas ended the call and sat in the dark hotel room, holding his son's USB drive, feeling the weight of 3 generations pressing down on his shoulders. Tomorrow he would drive to Fort Bragg. Tomorrow he would open his father's footlocker and find whatever secrets Ghost had left behind. Tomorrow he would begin the journey that would lead him back to war. But tonight he sat in the darkness and remembered. He remembered being 8 years old, watching his father clean a rifle in their North Carolina garage. Ghost Mercer had just returned from Vietnam, gaunt and hollow-eyed, moving like a man who had left parts of himself in the jungle. Young Thomas had asked what war was like, and Ghost had looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "War is patient, son. It waits. Sometimes it waits your whole life, but it never really ends, not for men like us." He remembered being 25, a young Marine Scout sniper in the first Gulf War, making shots that other shooters called impossible, feeling his father's training in every breath, every trigger pull, every perfect kill. He had understood then what Ghost meant. War was in their blood, in their bones, woven into the fabric of who they were. He remembered being 38, standing over Ghost's grave on the anniversary of his death, promising himself he would never become the hollow-eyed man his father had been. that he would get out while he still could, that he would be a father to David instead of a ghost. That promise was broken now, had been broken the moment someone put a bullet through David's scope, had been broken by the Chechen, if that's who it really was, by Mikhail Volkov, by the ghost of Laos and Vietnam, and all the old wars that never died. Thomas stood and walked to the window one final time. Down below, Washington, D.C. glittered in the December night, beautiful and indifferent. Somewhere out there, the Chechen was alive. Somewhere out there, Ghost Mercer's killer was still breathing, still operating, still running his networks and his weapons and his wars. Not for long, Thomas Mercer packed his bag, checked out of the hotel, and drove through the night toward Fort Bragg. In his pocket, the USB drive held his son's last words. In his truck, locked in a steel case, his rifle waited, the same rifle he had carried in Iraq and Somalia and a dozen other places where good men died. He had not touched it in 20 years, had not needed to, had believed that part of his life was over. He had been wrong. The highway unreeled before him, dark and empty. Snow had stopped falling. The sky was clear, full of stars, the kind of night that snipers loved because distance became irrelevant, because a good shooter could reach out and touch targets at ranges that seemed impossible. 1,800 meters, Marcus had said, in the dark, in the wind. The kind of shot Ghost Mercer could have made. The kind of shot Thomas himself could make. The kind of shot that started wars. By the time Thomas crossed into North Carolina, the first light of dawn was breaking over the Appalachian Mountains. He stopped at a rest area, bought coffee from a vending machine, and called the storage facility in Alexandria. They opened at 8. He would be there at 8:15. The coffee was terrible, burned and bitter. Thomas drank it anyway, felt the caffeine sharpen his focus, felt himself slipping back into old patterns. Mission planning, target analysis, the methodical thinking that made good snipers great and great snipers legendary. Somewhere in that footlocker was the truth about Phantom Strike. Somewhere in those old documents and maps and mission reports was the answer to what really happened in Laos in December 1975. Somewhere in his father's effects was the key to finding Mikhail Volkov. Thomas finished his coffee and got back on the road. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountains gold and amber. It was the kind of morning that made you believe in beauty, in peace, in the possibility that the world was fundamentally good. Thomas knew better. The storage facility in Alexandria was exactly what he expected. Rows of orange doors, security cameras, the smell of dust and forgotten things. Unit 247 was on the second floor, tucked in a corner where the hallway lights flickered. Thomas used the brass keys Marcus had given him, heard the lock click open with a sound like a rifle bolt chambering around. Inside the unit, covered in a tarp, sat Ghost Mercer's footlocker. It was military issue, olive drab, stenciled with his father's name and service number. The lock was simple, a 3-digit combination that Thomas knew by heart. His father's birthday. The numbers turned smoothly, well-maintained despite 50 years. The lock opened with a quiet snick. Thomas lifted the lid and smelled history. Gun oil and canvas and old paper. The smell of his childhood, of his father's garage, of the man who had taught him to shoot before he could ride a bicycle. On top, carefully folded, was Ghost Mercer's dress uniform. The ribbons were still bright, the Navy Cross prominent among them. Beneath the uniform, wrapped in oilcloth, was Ghost's rifle. A Winchester Model 70 and 30-06, custom built, the same rifle Ghost had carried through Vietnam. Thomas lifted it carefully, felt its familiar weight, saw his reflection in the still perfect bluing. Beneath the rifle were documents, mission reports, maps, photographs, all carefully organized in manila folders. Thomas spread them across the storage unit floor and began to read. Phantom Strike had been exactly what David described. 12 MACV SOG operators inserted into Laos on December 10, 1975, 6 months after the fall of Saigon. Their mission was to destroy a Soviet weapons cache and eliminate a high-value target, designation Winter Wolf. The weapons cache contained enough arms to supply an insurgency for years. Winter Wolf was identified as a Soviet advisor, specialization unknown. But there was more. Clipped to the mission report was a handwritten note in Ghost's familiar script. Winter Wolf is the Chechen, Mikhail Volkov, Spetsnaz sniper. 3 years hunting him through Laos and Cambodia. Finally got coordinates on his location. Going in December 12th, if I don't come back, someone needs to know the truth. The Chechen is more than a sniper. He's running the whole Soviet advisory network in Southeast Asia. And he knows our names. He knows our families. This is personal for him now. The note was dated December 11th, 1975, the day before Phantom Strike launched, the day before Ghost Mercer died. Thomas kept reading. The after-action report was heavily redacted, whole paragraphs blacked out, but he could piece together what happened. The team had infiltrated successfully, located the weapons cache, set demolition charges. But the Chechen had been waiting, had ambushed them in the jungle, picked them off one by one with impossible shots through dense vegetation, through darkness, through rain. 11 men extracted. Ghost stayed behind to cover their withdrawal. Last radio contact reported him engaging the target at close range. Then silence. Beneath the after-action report was a photograph, better quality than the one David had shown in his video. It showed a man in Soviet fatigue standing beside a camouflage position, face clearly visible this time. Mikhail Volkov was young in the photo, maybe 30, with the hard features and cold eyes of someone born for war. Someone had written on the back, in ghost handwriting, "The Chechen killed 3 of my best friends. Smart, patient, ruthless, respects the craft. If he gets me, tell my son to be better than I was." Thomas stared at that photograph for a long time, memorizing the face, burning it into his memory the way he had memorized 1,000 targets over 40 years of shooting. This was the man who killed his father. This was the man who, if David was right, had killed his son. This was the man Thomas was going to find. At the bottom of the footlocker, wrapped in a separate oilcloth bundle, was something unexpected. A journal, leather-bound, filled with Ghost's handwriting. Thomas opened it to the last entry, dated December 12th, 1975. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Hayes made it out. Tell him I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to come home. Tell my boy Thomas that I love him, that I'm proud of him, that some things are worth dying for. And tell him this, the Chechen is the best I've ever faced, maybe the best anyone has ever faced. But he's not invincible. He has a weakness. He's too proud. He always takes the hard shot when an easy one would work. Use that against him. Be smarter, not just better. And Thomas, if the Chechen ever comes for you or yours, remember what I taught you. Some men are born for war. You're one of them. Don't run from it. Don't apologize for it. Just be the best at it." The last line was underlined twice. Ghost out. Thomas closed the journal and sat in the storage unit, surrounded by his father's effects, feeling the weight of 50 years pressing down. Outside, Alexandria was alive with traffic and people and the mundane business of living. Inside this orange door, in this forgotten corner, the past was very much alive. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Thomas opened it and felt his blood go cold. The message contained a single photograph. It showed Marcus Webb, the young SEAL who had given Thomas the USB drive, sitting in what looked like a barracks room. Marcus was alive, unharmed, but his face was bruised and there was blood on his uniform. Behind him, barely visible in shadow, stood a figure Thomas could not make out clearly. The text below the photo was in English, but the phrasing was slightly off, the syntax of someone who had learned the language later in life. "Thomas Mercer, you look old. Your father looked stronger when I killed him. Your son was easier than expected. Are you next, or will you run like Americans always run? Coordinates below if you have courage. Come alone or the SEAL dies slowly. You have 48 hours. Below the message were GPS coordinates for a location in West Virginia. Thomas stared at the message for exactly 5 seconds. Then he called Hayes. The sergeant major answered on the first ring. "Gray, where are you?" "Alexandria, I found my father's footlocker." And the Chechen just sent me coordinates for a meeting. He has Marcus Webb." Hayes cursed, low and vicious. "It's a trap. Has to be." Of course it's a trap. Thomas was already repacking Ghost's rifle, gathering the documents, preparing to move. Question is whether I'm walking into it or setting one of my own. "Gray, you can't do this alone. You haven't been operational in 20 years. You're 58 years old. This guy has killed more people than you and I combined. Then I better get some practice in." Thomas locked the footlocker, pocketed his father's journal, headed for the exit. "I'm going to brag. I need you to make some calls. Find out who can still shoot, who still remembers how to run operations off the books. We have 48 hours to put together a team. And if we can't, Then I go alone. Hayes was silent for a moment. Your father said the same thing before Phantom Strike. You know how that turned out. Thomas reached his truck, loaded Ghost rifle into the back seat with his own, started the engine. The difference is, Bulldog, my father went in blind. I know exactly what I'm walking into. And I know something he didn't. What's that? The Chechen is old too. Maybe older than me. And old men make mistakes. Thomas ended the call and drove toward Fort Bragg, toward Hayes, and whatever help the old sergeant major could provide, toward the confrontation that had been waiting since 1975. In his rearview mirror, Alexandria receded into the distance. Ahead, the road stretched toward North Carolina, toward the place where Ghost Mercer had trained his son, toward the beginning of the end. The winter sun was high and bright, the kind of light that made long shots possible, that turned the world into a sniper's paradise of clear sight lines in perfect conditions. Thomas drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Ghost's journal in the passenger seat. Some men are born for war. His father had been right about that. Thomas had tried to be something else, had tried to be a father and a husband and a simple gunsmith. But war had been patient. War had waited. And now war had come calling again, the way it always did, the way it always would. The Chechen wanted a meeting, wanted Thomas to come alone, unarmed, defeated, wanted to end the Mercer line the way he had started 50 years ago. Thomas Mercer had other plans. In 48 hours, one way or another, this would be finished. Either the Chechen would die or Thomas would. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no walking away. This was what Ghost had died for. This was what David had discovered too late. This was the war that never ended, that just waited, that now demanded its final payment. Thomas pressed down on the accelerator and felt the truck surge forward. Ahead, Fort Bragg waited. Ahead, Hayes and whatever team they could assemble waited. Ahead, in 48 hours, in the mountains of West Virginia, the Chechen waited. And Thomas Mercer, the last of Ghost's line, was coming to settle accounts. The Montana gunsmith was gone. The quiet life was over. What remained was what had always been there beneath the surface, waiting for its moment. A weapon, a warrior, a man born for war. The last marksman was going hunting. Fort Bragg looked the same as it had 20 years ago, and that sameness was both comforting and unsettling. The same pine trees lined the roads. The same red brick buildings housed the same dreams of young soldiers becoming warriors. The same gun ranges echoed with the same sharp reports of rifles finding their marks. Thomas Mercer drove through the main gate with a visitor's pass and felt time collapse, felt himself becoming the man he used to be, the Marine who could shoot a cigarette out of a man's mouth at 600 yards. That man had been younger, faster, unbroken by the weight of bearing a son. Sergeant Major Ron Hayes waited outside the contractor building that housed the sniper training program. He looked older than Thomas remembered, but then again, they all did. 62 years had carved deep lines into Hayes' face, turned his hair white, bent his shoulders slightly under the weight of too many wars and too many friends left behind. But his eyes were still sharp, still the eyes of a spotter who could read wind and mirage and the future written in the shimmer of heat rising from desert sand. Hayes embraced Thomas with the kind of hug that combat veterans give each other, brief and fierce, and saying everything that words could not. When they separated, Hayes held Thomas at arm's length and studied his face the way a doctor might study an X-ray, looking for fractures. You look like hell, Gray. I feel worse. Thomas shouldered the rifle case he had brought from his truck, Ghost Winchester, in his own Remington 700 side-by-side in foam padding. Thanks for seeing me on short notice. Hayes led him inside the building, past classrooms where young soldiers studied ballistics in wind charts, past offices where contractors planned training curricula, into a private room at the back. The room was sparse, functional, containing only a table, chairs, and a gun safe that looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. Hayes locked the door behind them. Show me what you found. Thomas spread Ghost's documents across the table. The mission reports, the photographs, the journal entries, all of it laid out like evidence at a crime scene. Hayes studied each piece carefully, his face growing darker with every page turned. When he reached the photograph of Mikhail Volkov, the Chechen, he stopped and stared at it for a long moment. I remember when your father got this photo. Hayes' voice was distant, remembering. December 1974, see. A finally managed to get a positive ID on Winterwolf. Ghost was so damn happy. Thought we finally had him. Thought Phantom Strike would end it, but it didn't. Number Hayes set down the photograph. It made everything worse. The ambush in Laos, that wasn't random. The Chechen knew we were coming, knew exactly where we'd insert, what route we'd take, where we'd set up overwatch positions. He picked us apart like he had a copy of our op plan. Someone told him. Hayes met Thomas's eyes. That's what Ghost believed. In those last minutes, when we were hauling ass out of there and he was staying behind to cover us, he said the Chechen had to have inside information. Said there was a leak somewhere high up. Said if he didn't make it back, someone needed to investigate. Did anyone? Hayes laughed, bitter and short. You know how the military works, Gray. Mission failed, team leader dead, whole thing gets classified and buried. Nobody wanted to investigate whether we had a mole in MARKSMAN. Easier to call it bad luck and move on. Thomas picked up his father's journal, opened to that final entry, the words Ghost had written knowing he might not survive the next day. Some men are born for war. His father had believed that, had raised Thomas to believe it, had trained him from childhood to be a weapon, precise and patient and deadly. The Chechen sent me a message. Thomas pulled out his phone, showed Hayes the photograph of Marcus Webb bruised and bleeding, once a meeting in West Virginia, 48 hours. Hayes studied the photo. This is the SEAL who gave you David's files? Yes. Then he's probably already dead. The Chechen doesn't take hostages for negotiation, Gray. He takes them for bait. I know. Thomas put the phone away, which is why I'm not going alone. Hayes walked to the gun safe, worked the combination lock, pulled out a bottle of bourbon that looked older than both of them. He poured 2 glasses, neat, and handed one to Thomas. To answer your question from earlier, I can get you help. 4 men, all contractors here, all former special operations. Good shooters, good tactical minds, absolutely trustworthy. 4 isn't enough. It's what we have on short notice. Hayes downed his bourbon in one swallow. Everyone else is either deployed, retired to the point they can't operate, or dead. The old breed is dying out, Gray. Ghost generation is mostly gone. Yours and mine, we're not far behind. Then we better make this count. They drank in silence for a moment, the bourbon burning warm and familiar. Thomas could taste every deployment, every mission, every quiet moment before the shooting started when men like Hayes and Ghost would share a drink and pretend they weren't afraid. Tell me about these 4 men. Hayes refilled both glasses. First is Jack Morrison, Marine Scout sniper, same vintage as you. Did 3 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Retired as a gunnery sergeant, now teaches precision shooting to Delta kids. Solid as they come. Conservative on ammo, liberal with patience. Second is Carlos Mendez, former Delta operator, specialized in urban reconnaissance. Venezuelan by birth, American by choice. Speaks 6 languages, can blend into any environment. If we need intelligence on the Chechen's operation, Carlos is your man. Third is Patricia Cole. Thomas looked up sharply. Raymond Cole's daughter. Hayes nodded. Former Marine infantry officer, later CIA. She's been investigating her father's death for 5 years. Turns out Raymond died the same way David did. Long-range precision shot through his scope while on a training exercise. Officially ruled an accident. Patricia thinks the Chechen has been systematically eliminating everyone involved in Phantom Strike. How many are left? Hayes' face was grim. Of the 12 men who went into Laos that night, 8 died in the ambush. Ghost stayed behind and didn't make it. That left 3 who extracted successfully. Me, Raymond Cole, and a man named Victor Cross. Where's Cross now? Dead. Heart attack, 2018. At least that's what the coroner said. Patricia had the body exhumed last year, found traces of a rare toxin in his system. Took 6 years for it to kill him, but it did the job. So you're the last one, the last survivor of Phantom Strike. Hayes met his eyes. Which makes me bait, same as Marcus Webb. The Chechen wants to finish what he started in Laos. He wants everyone who was there dead, and he wants Ghost's bloodline erased. Then he's going to be disappointed. Thomas stood, walked to the window overlooking the gun ranges. Outside, young soldiers were learning to shoot, learning the fundamentals that would keep them alive in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. You said 4 men. That's only 3. The 4th is already on her way. Her name is Sophia Reyes, 28 years old, Marine lieutenant, current record holder for longest confirmed kill by a female Marine. 1,200 meters Syria last year. Why do we need her? Because she was David's spotter on his last deployment. Hayes joined Thomas at the window. She was there when he died, Gray. She saw the shot that killed him, and she's been trying to find the Chechen ever since. When I called her this morning and told her what we were planning, she was on a plane within an hour. Thomas processed this information, running tactical calculations in his head. 6 people against an unknown number of enemy combatants, led by a man who had been killing professionally for 50 years. The odds were not good. But then again, odds rarely were when the mission mattered. When do they arrive? Morrison and Mendez are already here, staying in base housing. Patricia flies in tonight from Langley. Sophia should land at Pope Air Force Base in about 3 hours. Then we have time for me to shoot. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You think you still can? Thomas picked up his rifle case. Only one way to find out. The 1,000-yard range was empty, reserved for Hayes and his special students. Thomas set up at the firing line while Hayes spotted, the old rhythm returning like muscle memory. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, heavier than he remembered, but the weight was good, familiar, honest. Wind was 5 miles per hour from the left, steady, temperature 72 degrees, humidity 40%. Thomas ran the calculations automatically, the mathematics of death that Ghost had drilled into him before he was old enough to drive. At 1,000 yards, a 5-mile-per-hour wind would push a bullet approximately 36 inches. He dialed the correction into his scope, settled into a prone position, and felt his body remember what his mind had tried to forget. Breathing slowed, heartbeat steadied. The world narrowed to the reticle and the target, a silhouette of a man 1,000 yards downrange. Thomas found the natural pause between breaths, the moment when the body was perfectly still, and pressed the trigger. The rifle roared. 1,000 yards away, the target's head disappeared in a puff of white paint. Hayes lowered his spotting scope. Not bad for an old man. Thomas worked the bolt, chambered another round. I'm rusty. You just made a headshot at 1,000 yards in 5 seconds. If that's rusty, I'd hate to see you warmed up. They shot for 2 hours, working through different ranges and conditions. 500 yards offhand, 700 yards from a barricade, 1,200 yards prone with a 15-mile-per-hour crosswind. Thomas's body protested, 58 years of wear demanding rest, but he pushed through the pain. This was training that might keep him alive in West Virginia. This was preparation that might let him finish what Ghost started. By the time they packed up, Thomas's shoulder ached from recoil and his hands were stiff from gripping the rifle. But his groups were tight, his hits consistent, his mind sharp. The Montana gunsmith had disappeared completely now. What remained was the weapon Ghost had forged, tested by time but not broken by it. Hayes helped him carry the equipment back to the truck. You're better than you think, Gray, but better doesn't mean ready. The Chechen isn't going to let you set up at 1,000 yards with perfect conditions. This is going to be close, dirty, and personal. I know, and you're still going. I'm still going. Hayes stopped at the truck, turned to face Thomas directly. Your father said the same thing right here in this parking lot the night before he left for Laos. I told him it was a bad idea, that we should wait for better intelligence, that rushing in would get us killed. You know what he said? What? He said some debts can't wait. Some things have to be settled now, or they never get settled at all. Hayes's voice was rough with memory. Then he got in his truck and drove away. I never saw him alive again. Thomas loaded his rifle into the back seat. The difference is I'm not Ghost. I'm not going in blind, and I'm not going alone. You're still going to get yourself killed. Maybe. Thomas closed the truck door. But not before I kill the Chechen. The team assembled that evening in a secure room at Fort Bragg's Special Operations Compound. Thomas studied each face, measuring them the way Ghost had taught him to measure men. Not by their words or their reputations, but by their eyes and their hands and the way they carried themselves. Jack Morrison was exactly what Hayes had promised. Mid-50s, built like a fire hydrant, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in the sun. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, and his eyes held the patient calm of a professional who had made thousands of shots and never rushed a single one. Carlos Mendez was smaller, compact, with the kind of face that could be any age and any ethnicity. He spoke with a slight accent that came and went depending on what he was saying, and his hands never stopped moving, always checking equipment, always ready. Patricia Cole was not what Thomas expected. She was 48 but looked younger, fit and sharp-eyed, with her father's bearing and her own quiet intensity. She shook Thomas's hand and held his gaze. I'm sorry about David. Patricia's voice was soft but steady. From what I understand, he figured out what took me 5 years to find. Your son was a hell of an investigator. He learned from the best. Thomas meant it. David had inherited Ghost's precision, but also his mother's intelligence, her ability to see patterns where others saw chaos. The last to arrive was Sophia Reyes. She was young, 28, with the athletic build of someone who ran 5 miles every morning and did pull-ups for fun. But her eyes were older than her face, aged by whatever she had seen through her scope in Syria. When she looked at Thomas, he saw recognition there, the kind that came from shared loss. Sophia didn't offer condolences. Instead, she set a notebook on the table and opened it to pages filled with diagrams and calculations. This is everything I observed the night Captain Mercer was killed. Wind speed, temperature, moon phase, the exact angle of the shot. I've spent 6 months analyzing it, trying to figure out who could make that shot under those conditions. And, Thomas asked, and there are maybe 15 people alive who could have done it. Sophia pulled out a list of names. I've tracked down 12 of them, confirmed their locations the night of the shooting. All of them had alibis. That leaves 3 possibilities. She pointed to the first name, Dmitry Volkov, Russian national, former Spetsnaz instructor, currently retired in Moscow. Age 68, known associate of Mikhail Volkov. Hayes leaned forward. Son? Possibly. Sophia moved to the second name, Alexei Volkov, nationality unknown, age approximately 40. No confirmed photographs, but multiple intelligence reports place him in Syria, Yemen, and Libya over the past decade, always operating as a sniper for hire. And the third? Sophia hesitated. The third is Mikhail Volkov himself. If he's still alive, he'd be in his mid-70s. Old for field operations, but not impossible. Patricia spoke up. I have been tracking Volkov family connections for 2 years. Mikhail had 3 sons. The eldest, Dmitry, stayed in Russia and became a trainer. The middle son, Alexei, followed his father into private military contracting. The youngest, Victor, was killed in Chechnya in 1999. So we're looking at either the father or the middle son. Morrison's voice was calm, analytical. Either way, they have the skills and the motivation. Thomas studied the photographs Sophia had compiled. Dmitry Volkov looked like his father, the same hard features and cold eyes. Alexei was a ghost, no clear images, just blurred surveillance photos and distant shots. But in every photo, he held himself the same way Ghost had held himself, the way Thomas himself stood. The posture of a sniper, patient and coiled and deadly. The question is, which one killed David? Thomas looked at Sophia. You were there, you saw the shot. What's your professional opinion? Sophia met his eyes without flinching. Whoever made that shot wasn't just good, sir. They were transcendent. The angle, the distance, the conditions, everything about it was impossible. But they made it anyway. That's not just training. That's genetics. That's someone who was born to do this. Like Ghost. Like all of you, Sophia gestured around the table. This family, the Volkovs, they're your mirror image. 3 generations of snipers, each one better than the last. And they've been hunting your family for 50 years. Thomas let that sink in, a generational war, fathers and sons on both sides, each killing the other's bloodline. Ghost and Mikhail in Laos, David and whoever pulled that trigger in Syria, and now Thomas, the last Mercer, against whoever remained of the Volkov line. Hayes spread a map across the table. The coordinates the Chechen sent you, he tapped a point in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. It's an old CIA training facility, decommissioned in the 90s. Perfect place for an ambush. High ground, limited approaches, full of buildings that could hide 100 shooters. So we don't go there. Mendez studied the map. We gather intelligence first, figure out what we're walking into, then make a plan. We don't have time for a proper reconnaissance. Patricia pointed at the 48-hour timeline. He gave us 2 days. We have to assume that's not arbitrary. Maybe he's got other operations planned. Maybe Marcus Webb doesn't have 2 days. Or maybe, Morrison said quietly, he wants us to rush, wants us to come in hot and stupid. Classic ambush setup. Thomas looked at each face around the table. These were good people, skilled and brave, and willing to risk their lives for a cause that wasn't even theirs. They didn't know him anything. Didn't know Ghost or David or the ghosts of Phantom Strike. But they were here anyway, because that's what warriors did. They stood together against the darkness, even when the odds were impossible. Here's what we know. Thomas pointed to the map. The Chechen, whoever he is, wants me specifically. The message was clear. Come alone or Marcus dies. He's expecting a solo operator, probably out of shape, probably emotional. He's expecting an easy kill. What's he getting instead, Sophia asked. A team. Thomas met each person's eyes in turn. 6 of us against however many he has. We go in quiet, we go in smart, and we end this. Not just for Marcus Webb, not just for David or Ghost or Raymond Cole. We end the whole damn vendetta. No more Volkov, no more hunting Mercers. It stops in West Virginia. Hayes smiled, grim and satisfied. Now you sound like your father. They planned through the night, running scenarios and contingencies, arguing over approaches in fields of fire, testing each other's ideas until the weak points showed. Morrison wanted a direct assault, overwhelming firepower. Mendez advocated for infiltration and reconnaissance. Patricia pushed for intelligence gathering first, understanding the enemy before engaging. Sophia wanted to set up a counter-sniper position and eliminate targets methodically. Thomas listened to all of them, weighed every option, and made the call Ghost would have made. They would split into 2 teams. Morrison, Mendez, and Hayes would approach from the south, creating a diversion, making noise, drawing attention. Thomas, Patricia, and Sophia would infiltrate from the north, moving slow and quiet, finding the Chechen's position, taking the shot that ended this. It was risky. It relied on perfect timing and a lot of luck, but it was the best chance they had. They spent the next day preparing. Equipment checks, weapon zeroing, medical supplies, communications gear, everything they would need for an operation that might go sideways in 100 different ways. Thomas moved through the preparations automatically, muscle memory from 100 missions, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about Ghost, about those final moments in Laos when his father chose to stay behind so others could live. Was it courage or resignation? Did Ghost know he was going to die, or did he believe he could win? Thomas had spent 40 years wondering, and now he was about to face the same choice. Patricia found him on the range that afternoon making final adjustments to his rifle. She didn't speak, just stood beside him and watched as he fired 3 shots into a target 600 yards away. All 3 bullets passed through the same hole. Your father was the same way. Patricia's voice was quiet. I was 12 when he died. I remember him coming home from deployments, spending hours in our garage, cleaning his rifle, making it perfect. Mom hated it, said he loved that gun more than he loved us. Did he? Patricia smiled sadly. No, he loved us more than anything. That's why he was so careful with the rifle, because that rifle kept him alive, and staying alive meant coming home to us. Until it didn't. Patricia pulled out a photograph from her pocket, handed it to Thomas. It showed a man in marine dress blues, standing beside a young girl with dark hair. Raymond Cole and his daughter, frozen in time, before Laos and Phantom Strike and all the years of wondering. The Chechen took my father from me. Patricia took the photo back, studied it. I've spent 5 years trying to find him, trying to understand why. All I found were more bodies, more families destroyed. Your son was the first person who figured out the pattern. He knew the Chechen was systematically eliminating everyone connected to Phantom Strike. Did David know he was being hunted? Patricia nodded. He called me 3 weeks before he died, said he was close to something big, something that would finally expose the whole operation. He asked me to look after you if anything happened to him, said you'd want revenge, and revenge would get you killed. Thomas loaded another magazine into his rifle. What did you tell him? That I'd try. Patricia's smile was brittle. But we both knew you'd do what you wanted. Mercer men don't listen to warnings. We listen. Thomas chambered around. We just don't care. They shot together until the sun went down. 2 people bound by loss and purpose, preparing for a mission that might be their last. When the light failed and the targets disappeared into darkness, they walked back to the compound in comfortable silence. Sophia was waiting for them, gear already packed, face set with determination. Lieutenant Reyes had been professional all day, focused and calm, but now Thomas saw something else in her eyes. Grief, the same raw wound he carried. You cared about David, it wasn't a question. Sophia didn't flinch from the truth. He was my captain, sir, my mentor, the best shot I ever worked with. She paused. And my friend, we talked about everything. His family, his father, his grandfather. He was proud to be a Mercer, proud of the legacy. Then why did he investigate Phantom Strike? Why dig into things that got him killed? Because he knew the legacy was incomplete. Sophia met Thomas's eyes. David told me something 3 days before he died. Said Ghost Mercer didn't just die in Laos. He sacrificed himself for a mission that was betrayed from the inside. Said someone sold out Phantom Strike, and that same someone helped the Chechen escape. David was trying to prove it. Who did he suspect? Sophia shook her head. He never said. But he was close, I could tell. He had that look people get when they're about to solve something important. Then he was dead, and all his files were classified. Thomas felt cold certainty settle in his gut. David had found something. Some piece of evidence that proved Phantom Strike was compromised. And that evidence got him killed. Tomorrow we finish what he started. Thomas picked up his rifle case. We find the Chechen, we end the Volkov line, and we make sure no more Mercers die for this. The team departed Fort Bragg at 0400 hours, 3 vehicles rolling north through darkness toward West Virginia. Thomas rode with Patricia and Sophia, the 3 of them quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Morrison, Mendez, and Hayes followed in a second truck, weapons and ammunition packed carefully in hardened cases. A third vehicle, driven by a contractor who would turn back at the state line, carried their backup gear and emergency supplies. The roads were empty at this hour, just them in the darkness and the weight of what they were about to do. Thomas watched the landscape roll past, pine forest giving way to mountains, civilization fading into wilderness. Somewhere ahead in those mountains, the Chechen was waiting. Somewhere ahead, Marcus Webb was either alive or dead, bait in a trap set 50 years ago. They stopped at a rest area 2 hours from the target. Final equipment check. Final confirmation of the plan. Morrison spread maps across the hood of the truck, pointing out rally points and fallback positions. Mendez verified communications gear, making sure everyone could talk to everyone else. Hayes loaded magazines with the methodical care of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Thomas stood apart from the group, breathing the cold mountain air, centering himself the way Ghost had taught him. Fear was normal, doubt was human. But when the shooting started, there was only the target and the trigger and the space between heartbeats where death lived. Sophia approached, offered him a cup of coffee from a thermos. Couldn't sleep anyway, she said. Figured you couldn't either. Thomas accepted the coffee. It was strong and black and terrible. Perfect. You don't have to do this, Lieutenant. This isn't your fight. With respect, sir, yes, it is. Sophia looked toward the mountains, toward where the sun would rise in another hour. David was my captain. He deserved better than a bullet through his scope. He deserved to come home. They all do. Yes, sir, they all do. But most don't. So the least we can do is make sure they didn't die for nothing. Thomas drank his coffee and watched the eastern sky begin to lighten. Somewhere in those mountains, the last battle of a 50-year war was waiting. Somewhere in the darkness, the Chechen was preparing his final ambush. But Thomas Mercer was not Ghost Mercer. He was not walking in blind. He had a team, he had a plan, and he had something his father never had. He knew exactly what he was fighting for. The sun broke over the mountains, painting the sky red and gold. Thomas finished his coffee, checked his rifle one last time, and looked at the 5 people who had chosen to stand with him. Warriors all, bound by loss and honor, and the simple faith that some things were worth dying for. Hayes caught his eye, gave a single nod. Ready? Thomas felt Ghost's presence beside him, felt David's memory at his back, felt the weight of 3 generations settling on his shoulders like armor. Let's end this. The abandoned CIA training facility sat in a valley like a forgotten gravestone. Concrete buildings slowly being reclaimed by the West Virginia wilderness. Moss crept up walls, trees pushed through cracked pavement. Nature was patient, and nature always won in the end. Thomas Mercer studied the compound through binoculars from a ridgeline 800 yards away, counting buildings and sight lines and all the places a sniper could hide. 12 structures visible from this position. Administration building, 3 barracks, a water tower, vehicle garage, armory, mess hall, chapel, medical building, 2 storage units, and what looked like an old shooting house for close quarters combat training. Any one of them could conceal a shooter. All of them probably did. Patricia Cole lay beside him in the pine needles, her own optics scanning different sectors, dividing the battlefield into manageable pieces the way good operators did. She had been doing this since before Sophia Reyes was born, and it showed in the economy of her movements, The patience of her observation. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. I count at least 6 good sniper positions just in the buildings I can see. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. Water tower gives 360 coverage. Administration building roof has clear fields of fire to the north and east. The chapel bell tower overlooks the whole compound. Thomas shifted his view to the chapel. It was the tallest structure, white paint peeling in long strips, the cross at its peak tilted at an angle that suggested decades of wind and neglect. A bell tower that high would give a shooter command of the entire valley. If he were setting an ambush, that's where he would position his primary marksman. Sophia was 50 yards to their right, concealed in a different hide, covering their flank and watching for movement the others might miss. Somewhere below them, invisible in the forest, Morrison and his team were moving into position for the diversion that would draw attention away from Thomas's infiltration. The plan was simple. Simple plans failed less often than complicated ones. Hayes's voice crackled in Thomas's earpiece, barely audible. Alpha team in position. South Ridge, 600 yards from the main gate. I count 2 sentries visible, probably more we can't see. Thomas keyed his radio twice. Acknowledgement without words. Radio discipline was critical now. The Chechen would be listening, waiting for mistakes, for the little errors that gave away positions and got people killed. Movement in the compound. Patricia touched Thomas's arm, directed his attention to the administration building. Second floor, third window from the left. Thomas swung his binoculars, caught a glimpse of shadow moving behind dirty glass. Someone was up there, someone who knew how to move without silhouetting themselves against light. Professional, not a guard, a hunter. That's one. Thomas marked the position on his mental map. 11 more buildings to clear. They watched for 30 minutes, patient as stones, while the sun climbed higher and the morning mist burned off the valley. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon, more valuable than any rifle or scope. Ghost had taught Thomas that before he taught him how to shoot. Wait long enough and the enemy reveals himself. Wait long enough and the impossible shot becomes easy. 3 more positions identified. A shooter on the water tower, barely visible behind the railing. Someone in the vehicle garage, moving between cars that had been sitting there since the 90s. A figure on the mess hall roof, prone behind the parapet, scanning with optics of his own. 4 confirmed hostiles, probably twice that many hidden. Not terrible odds, except they were all professionals, all chosen by the Chechen for their skills, all willing to die to protect whatever was happening in that compound. Your call, Gray? Patricia was looking at him, waiting. The mission was his. The decision was his. Ghost had carried that weight in Laos. Now it was Thomas's turn. Thomas studied the compound one more time, looking for the piece that didn't fit. The anomaly that would tell him where the Chechen was hiding. The administration building was too obvious. The water tower too exposed. The chapel tower was perfect, which made it suspect. A man who had survived 50 years of war didn't choose the perfect position. He chose the one nobody expected. There, Thomas pointed to the medical building, squat and unremarkable at the compound's edge. Small windows, only one entrance, close to the tree line for a quick escape. It's where I'd be. Patricia studied it through her scope. No movement visible, no signs of occupation. Exactly. Thomas keyed his radio. All units. Primary target is the medical building. Southeast corner of compound. Alpha team, begin your diversion in 5 minutes. Bravo team, we move on the first shot. Hayes's voice came back, steady as bedrock. Copy that. See you on the other side. Thomas, Patricia, and Sophia began their descent from the ridgeline, moving slow through the forest, using every scrap of cover. Thomas felt his 58-year-old knees protest the crouch walk, felt his back complain about the weight of his rifle and pack, but pushed through the discomfort. Pain was temporary. Death was permanent. Ghost had said that, and Ghost had been right about most things. The forest was thick here, old-growth pine and oak that had survived a century of logging and development. Good concealment, but also good cover for the enemy. Every tree could hide a shooter. Every shadow could conceal a threat. Thomas moved with his rifle up, scanning sectors, trusting Patricia and Sophia to cover the angles he couldn't see. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. Thomas froze, hand up in a fist, the universal signal for halt. Patricia and Sophia stopped instantly, weapons trained, barely breathing. The forest went quiet. that unnatural silence that meant predators were near. 30 seconds passed. A deer emerged from the underbrush, a young buck, oblivious to the humans holding perfectly still 10 feet away. It browsed for a moment, then continued on, white tail flicking. The forest's normal sounds resumed, birds calling, wind in the trees, life continuing despite the death that was coming. They reached the compound's edge just as the first shots cracked across the valley. Morrison's team, executing the diversion, laying down fire at the south gate. The effect was immediate, voices shouting in the compound, movement as guards rushed toward the sound. The shooter on the water tower swung his rifle south. Perfect. Thomas led Patricia and Sophia toward the medical building, using the chaos to cover their approach. They crossed the open ground in a sprint, 50 yards that felt like a mile, expecting bullets to find them at any moment. But the diversion was working. All eyes were on the south gate, on Morrison's team making noise and drawing fire. The medical building's door was locked. Sophia produced a breaching tool, thin strips of explosive that would blow the hinges without alerting the whole compound. She placed the charges with practiced efficiency, stepped back, keyed the detonator. The explosion was small, focused, professional. The door fell inward. Thomas was through it instantly, rifle up, sweeping the interior. Empty hallway, doors leading to examination rooms. Stairs going up to a second floor. Everything covered in dust and cobwebs and the decay of abandonment. Clear, Thomas whispered. They moved through this building room by room, clearing spaces that had once held medical equipment and hope, and the young soldiers being prepared for war. Now there was only emptiness and the faint smell of mold and time. But someone had been here recently. Thomas could see it in the disturbed dust, the footprints leading to the stairs, the faint scent of cigarette smoke that hadn't had time to fully dissipate. Upstairs, he pointed. Sophia took point, moving up the stairs with her rifle shouldered, Patricia covering from below, Thomas watching their backs. The second floor was darker, windows covered with plywood, only thin streams of light penetrating the gloom. More examination rooms, a surgery that had been stripped of equipment, an office with a desk still sitting exactly where it had been left 30 years ago. And at the end of the hall, a door that had been reinforced. New hinges, new lock, fresh wood where the rest was rotted. Someone's home, Patricia murmured. Thomas approached the door, tested the handle. Locked. He looked at Sophia, who produced her breaching kit again, but before she could set the charges, the door opened from inside. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, alive but looking like he had been through hell. His face was bruised, one eye swollen shut, blood crusted around his nose and mouth. His hands were bound with zip ties. But he was standing, which meant he was strong, which meant there was still hope. Sir, Marcus's voice was rough, damaged. It's a trap. He's not here. He's never been here. Thomas felt ice formed in his gut. Where? Fort Bragg. Marcus swayed, caught himself against the doorframe. He's hitting Fort Bragg right now. This whole thing was misdirection. Get you away from the base so he could hit the real target. Who's the real target? Everyone. Marcus's legs gave out. Thomas caught him, lowered him to the floor. Everyone who trained you. Everyone who knew Ghost. He's finishing Phantom Strike today. All of it. Patricia was already on the radio, trying to raise Hayes, trying to warn Morrison, trying to reach Fort Bragg. But there was only static, the kind of interference that meant someone was jamming communications. Someone who knew they were here. Someone who had planned this perfectly. Thomas looked at Sophia. Get him out of here. Get him to a hospital. Sir, I can still fight. That's an order, Lieutenant. Thomas helped her lift Marcus, get him moving toward the stairs. Patricia and I will secure this building, then we'll link up with Morrison's team. Sophia hesitated, torn between duty and orders, but ultimately training won. She half-carried Marcus toward the stairs, moving fast, knowing that every second might matter. Patricia was checking the room Marcus had been held in, her face grim. Gray, you need to see this. The room had been set up as a command center, maps on the walls, photographs, surveillance images of Fort Bragg, of the sniper ranges, of the buildings where contractors trained Delta Force and Rangers, and all the young shooters who would carry on Ghost's legacy. And in the center of the largest map, circled in red marker, was the exact building where Hayes worked. He's going after Bulldog. Thomas felt rage and fear war inside him. Hayes was the last survivor of Phantom Strike. The last man besides the Chechen who knew what really happened in Laos. Kill Hayes, and the truth died with him. There's more. Patricia pointed to a timeline on the wall. Today's date was marked with a single word: completion. And below it, a list of names all crossed out except one: Ron Hayes. Every other name was someone Thomas recognized: Raymond Cole, Victor Cross, 8 others from the Phantom Strike team, all dead over the past 10 years, all killed in ways that looked like accidents or natural causes. The Chechen had been patient, methodical, taking his time, making sure nobody suspected the pattern. Until David figured it out. We need to go. Thomas was moving before he finished speaking, heading for the stairs, knowing they were too late but unable to accept it. Fort Bragg was 4 hours away. Even if they drove at illegal speeds, pushed every limit, they wouldn't make it in time. The shooting outside had stopped. Morrison's diversion had served its purpose, drawn the guards away, created the opening for Thomas and Patricia to infiltrate. But now the silence was ominous, heavy with implications. Where were the guards? Where was the Chechens' team? They reached the ground floor and found their answer. The guards weren't chasing Morrison. They weren't defending the compound. They were gone, pulled out while Thomas was upstairs, leaving the facility empty except for Marcus's bait. It was all misdirection, every bit of it. Thomas's radio crackled to life. Hayes's voice strained and urgent. "Gray, we've got a situation. Shots fired at Fort Bragg. Multiple casualties reported at the sniper training building. I'm going dark. If you can hear this, don't come back. It's what he wants." The transmission ended in static. Thomas stood in the empty medical building, surrounded by the evidence of a plan that had worked perfectly, and felt the same helplessness Ghost must have felt in Laos. Outmaneuvered, outthought, used. Patricia's hand on his arm brought him back. "We can still stop this. Fort Bragg has security, MPs, quick reaction forces. Hayes isn't alone." Hayes is exactly alone, that's the point. Thomas started for the exit. The Chechen wants him isolated, wants him vulnerable, wants to finish Phantom Strike the way it should have ended in Laos. They emerged from this medical building into chaos. Morrison's team was pulling back from the South Ridge, fighting a running battle with an enemy that had appeared from nowhere. Gunfire echoed across the valley. Smoke rose from the tree line, and somewhere in that confusion, the Chechens' plan was unfolding exactly as designed. Thomas and Patricia reached the extraction point where they had left their vehicle, but the truck was gone. Not damaged, not disabled. Gone. Taken by someone who knew exactly where it would be parked. He thought of everything. Patricia's voice held reluctant admiration. Every contingency, every possible response. Not everything. Thomas pulled out his phone, dialed a number he had memorized decades ago but never called. The emergency contact for situations that couldn't be handled through official channels. The number that connected directly to people who made problems disappear. A voice answered, professional and alert. Identify. Gray Mercer. Authorization code Ghostwalker 01. I need immediate extraction from West Virginia and fast transport to Fort Bragg. Active shooter situation. Federal facility under attack. Stand by. 10 seconds of silence. Then the voice returned. Extraction helicopter inbound your location. ETA 12 minutes. Ground team will secure the facility. You'll be wheels up in 15. Thomas ended the call. Patricia was staring at him. What was that? Something Ghost set up before he died. Thomas scanned the sky, listening for rotors. Insurance policy for his family. Never had to use it until now. The helicopter came in fast and low. A civilian bird with no markings but flown by someone with military precision. The pilot didn't ask questions, just got them airborne and pointed east toward North Carolina. Thomas watched the West Virginia mountains fall away below, watched the compound shrink to insignificance, and thought about all the ways this had gone wrong. The Chechen had never been at the facility, had probably never intended to be there. The whole thing was theater, designed to pull Thomas away from Fort Bragg, to isolate Hayes, to create the perfect conditions for finishing what started in Laos 50 years ago. But there was something else, something that didn't fit. The Chechen could have killed Hayes at any time over the past 10 years. Could have made it look like an accident, like all the others. Why wait? Why now? Why this elaborate setup? Because he wants witnesses. Patricia was looking at Thomas, following his thoughts. He wants people to know, wants the world to understand that he won, that he beat Ghost Mercer's legacy. This isn't just about revenge, it's about proving something. Thomas thought about that as the helicopter raced east, vibrating with urgency, every minute counting. The Chechen was old now, probably in his 70s. This was his last mission, his final statement. And like any artist, he wanted his masterpiece to be seen. The helicopter set down at Fort Bragg 38 minutes after leaving West Virginia. Not fast enough. Thomas knew it the moment he saw the fire trucks and ambulances clustered around the sniper training building. Knew it from the way MPS were setting up perimeter tape. Knew it from the body bags being loaded into a coroner's van. Thomas was running before the helicopter fully stopped. Patricia right behind him. Both of them ignoring the MPS trying to wave them back. Thomas had his credentials out, his retired military ID, his contractor authorization that Hayes had arranged, anything that would get him past the tape. A captain in MP uniform blocked his path. "Sir, this is an active crime scene. I need you to step back." "Sergeant Major Hayes." Thomas's voice was raw. "Where is he?" The captain's expression softened slightly. "Sir, there were 4 casualties. 3 contractors, 1 active duty instructor. We haven't released names pending next of kin notification." "Hayes doesn't have next of kin." Thomas pushed past the captain, ducked under the tape, saw Morrison and Mendez standing by one of the ambulances. Morrison's arm was bandaged. Mendez had blood on his face. But they were alive, which meant they weren't the 4 casualties. Morrison saw Thomas, shook his head slowly. "We got here 10 minutes too late, Gray. Building was already hit. Shooter was in the tree line, maybe 800 yards out. Took his shots and vanished." "Hayes?" Morrison pointed toward the building. He went down trying to get the students to cover. Took a round through the shoulder, kept moving anyway. Second shot hit him in the back. Thomas walked toward the building on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. The door was propped open. Inside, the classroom where Hayes had taught thousands of young shooters over the years was destroyed. Chairs overturned, equipment shattered, blood on the floor. Hayes lay near the back wall, surrounded by medics who had stopped trying to save him and were now just documenting the scene. Thomas knelt beside his father's best friend, the man who had carried ghost memory for 50 years, and saw that Hayes was still breathing. Shallow, labored, but breathing. "Bulldog." Thomas took Hayes's hand, felt the grip, weak but present. "Stay with me. Medics are here. You're going to be fine." Hayes's eyes opened, focused on Thomas with effort. Liar. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. Always were a terrible liar. "Save your strength." "For what?" Hayes coughed, grimaced with pain. "It's done, Gray. He won, just like Laos." "Who is he?" Thomas leaned closer. "Mikhail or Alexei? Father or son?" Hayes's grip tightened slightly. "Both. They were both here, working together. 2 generations, just like you and David." "That's not possible." Thomas felt reality shift. "You said Mikhail would be in his 70s. "He is." Hayes's breathing was getting worse. "But age doesn't matter for this. They planned it together, father teaching son, just like Ghost taught you, the pattern repeating." "Where are they now?" Hayes smiled, blood on his teeth. "Gone. Like ghosts." He coughed again, harder this time. "But Gray, you need to know something. About Phantom Strike, about what really happened." Thomas leaned closer, barely breathing, waiting for the truth that Ghost had died protecting. The mission was solid. Hayes's voice was fading. Good intelligence, good planning. But when we got there, Mikhail was waiting. Knew we were coming, knew our call signs, knew your father by name. "Someone told him." Hayes nodded slightly. "Someone high up, someone who wanted Phantom Strike to fail. Your father figured it out that night, radioed it in, said there was a traitor in Mac Fasog Command. Said he had proof." "What happened to the proof?" "Ghost died before he could get it out." Hayes's eyes were closing, but he told me where he hid it. Made me promise to tell you if the time came. The time's come, Gray." "Where?" "The chapel." Hayes was barely whispering now. "Old training facility in Virginia. Where we did our final workup before Laos. There's a loose stone in the foundation. East wall, 3 feet up. Behind it, Ghost left everything. Names, dates, evidence." Thomas gripped Hayes's hand tighter. "Bulldog, stay with me. We'll get the evidence. We'll expose whoever betrayed you." Hayes shook his head minutely. "You'll expose them. I'm done. Tell Ghost I kept my promise. Tell him I tried to protect his boy." "You did protect me. You and Ghost both." Number Hayes's eyes opened one last time, looking past Thomas at something only he could see. "We failed. You're still in the war, still fighting ghosts." "I'm sorry, Gray. So sorry." The grip on Thomas's hand relaxed. The breathing stopped, and Sergeant Major Ron Hayes, the last survivor of Phantom Strike, died the same way Ghost Mercer had died, fighting, unbroken, alone. Thomas stayed kneeling beside Hayes's body until Patricia gently pulled him away, until the medics covered his friend with a sheet, until there was nothing left to do but walk out into the North Carolina morning and face the reality of what came next. Morrison and Mendez were waiting outside, both looking like they had aged 10 years in the past hour. Sophia had arrived from West Virginia with Marcus, who was being treated by medics despite his protests. The Chechen got away, Morrison said. Local PD found his shooting position. He left the rifle, left everything, like he wanted us to know he was here. Thomas looked at the tree line, at the spot 800 yards away where someone had killed Hayes with precision and patience and 50 years of hatred. Two shooters, Hayes had said, father and son, working together. Patricia appeared beside him, phone in her hand. I just got word from Langley. They pulled surveillance footage from the base gates. Two men entered at 0600 this morning, both with contractor credentials that looked legitimate. One was approximately 75 years old, the other maybe 40. IDS? False, obviously. But facial recognition got a hit on the older man. Mikhail Volkov. He's alive, Gray, and he brought his son to finish this. Thomas watched them load Hayes's body into the coroner's van, watched them close the doors on another casualty of a war that should have ended in 1975. Around him, Fort Bragg continued its daily routine, soldiers training, preparing for wars yet to come, oblivious to the fact that old wars never really ended. They just waited. Sophia approached, her face set with determination. Sir, Marcus told me something while we were extracting, about what he overheard while he was captive. Thomas turned to her, waiting. The Volkovs are planning something bigger. This attack on Fort Bragg, killing Hayes, it's all prologue. Marcus heard them talking about an event in D.C., something happening in 3 months. Anniversary of something. Patricia's voice was quiet. The memorial ceremony, April 20th, next year, 50th anniversary dedication. Sophia nodded. Alexei told Mikhail that everything was in place, that all the old ghosts would gather in one place, that they could finish all of it at once. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. How many Phantom Strike families would be at that ceremony? How many children and grandchildren of the men who died in Laos? How many people gathered in one place? Perfect targets for someone willing to wait 50 years for revenge. We have 3 months. Thomas looked at each face. 3 months to find them, stop them, and end this for real. Morrison spat into the dirt. Then we better get started, because if they hit that memorial, they'll kill hundreds, maybe thousands. 3 months until the memorial ceremony. 3 months to find the Volkovs. 3 months to prepare for the final battle. But first, Thomas needed to know who betrayed Ghost, who sold out Phantom Strike, who had been helping the Chechen for 50 years. The chapel in Virginia held answers. Ghost evidence, hidden for decades, waiting for someone to find it. Tomorrow, Thomas would go there. Tomorrow, he would uncover the truth. But tonight, he stood at Fort Bragg and mourned another friend, another casualty of a war that consumed everyone it touched. The hunt would continue. The truth would be found. And somehow, Thomas would end what Ghost started, or die trying. The chapel appeared through the Virginia woods like a vision from another era. White paint long since peeled away. Roof collapsed on one side. Stained glass windows shattered and empty. It sat alone in a clearing, surrounded by forest, miles from the nearest road. The perfect place to hide something. The perfect place for answers. Thomas Mercer approached on foot, leaving his truck hidden a quarter-mile back. Patricia Cole moved beside him, rifle ready, both of them scanning for threats. After West Virginia and Fort Bragg, they trusted nothing. Morrison and Mendez were recovering from their wounds, giving Thomas and Patricia space to pursue this lead alone. The chapel's interior was devastation and beauty combined. Pews rotted and broken, altar crumbled, but shafts of sunlight coming through the broken roof created cathedral light, holy and pure. East wall, Hayes had said, 3 feet up. Thomas found the spot, ran his hands along the stone, felt for the loose piece. Nothing. He tried higher, lower, searched the entire section. It's not here. Patricia was checking the rest of the wall. Maybe it fell out. Maybe someone else found it. Thomas refused to believe that. Ghost had hidden this evidence carefully, had died to protect it. It had to be here. Had to be. Sir, Patricia was kneeling near the floor examining something. There's fresh mortar here. Someone repaired this stone recently. Thomas joined her, saw what she meant. One stone had been removed and replaced. The mortar still light-colored, maybe only days old. Someone had been here. Someone had found what Ghost left behind. He took it. Thomas felt rage and despair war inside him. The Chechen got here first. Maybe not. Patricia was photographing the wall with her phone. If they knew about this place, they would have destroyed the chapel, eliminated the evidence completely. But they repaired the wall. That suggests they want us to know they were here. Want us to know they're ahead of us. Thomas stood, brushed stone dust from his hands. Psychological warfare. He walked outside, stood in the clearing, looked at the forest surrounding them. Somewhere out there, the Chechen was watching. Had to be. This was too perfect, too theatrical. Mikhail Volkov wanted Thomas to find the empty hiding spot, wanted him to know that every move was anticipated, every plan countered. But wanting Thomas to feel defeated and actually defeating him were different things. Thomas pulled out his phone, called a number he had avoided using for years. The number that connected to people even deeper in the shadows than Ghost had been. The number that represented power without oversight, capability without restraint. A woman's voice answered, cool and professional. Mercer, we've been expecting your call. I need everything you have on Mikhail and Alexei Volkov. Every sighting, every operation, every contact. And I need to know who had the clearance and opportunity to betray Phantom Strike. That information is classified beyond your authorization. My father died protecting it. My son died investigating it. My best friend died because of it. Thomas's voice was ice. You either help me or I go public with everything I know about Ghost operations. Your choice. Silence on the line, then hold for encryption. 10 seconds later, the woman returned. Information is being compiled. You'll have it within the hour. But Mercer, understand this. Once you see what's in those files, you can't unsee it. Some truths destroy more than they illuminate. I'll take that risk. Your father said the same thing. The call ended. Thomas stood in the clearing, surrounded by forest and secrets, and felt the weight of 3 generations pressing down on his shoulders. Ghost had died searching for the truth. David had died finding it. Hayes had died protecting it. And now Thomas, the last Mercer standing, was going to use it to end the war that had consumed his family. His phone buzzed. Files incoming. Encrypted. Password protected. Thomas opened them, saw decades of classified documents, surveillance photos, operation summaries. Years of intelligence, compiled meticulously, showing patterns of betrayal that stretched back 50 years. And at the center of it all, a name he recognized. General Harold Blackwood, current Director of Special Operations Command, former MACV, SOG Commander. Ghost Mercer's superior officer. The man who had sent Phantom Strike into Laos. The man who had access to every detail of the mission. The man who could have told the Chechen exactly where Ghost's team would be. Thomas felt ice crystallize in his veins. Blackwood had been at Hayes' memorial, had expressed condolences, had acted like a friend, and all along he had been the one who betrayed them. Patricia was reading over his shoulder, her face going pale. Blackwood sent your father to die, not just sent him. Thomas scrolled through the files, seeing communication intercepts, financial records, evidence compiled by intelligence agencies over decades. Sold him out, told the Chechen everything. Made Ghost and his team into bait. We need to confront him. Patricia's voice was hard. Make him answer for what he did. Thomas looked at the files, at the evidence that could destroy a 4-star general, that could expose secrets the government had buried for 50 years. But exposure wouldn't bring back Ghost or Hayes or David. Wouldn't stop the Chechen. Wouldn't end the war. We will. Thomas pocketed his phone. But first we need to understand why. Why betray the mission? Why let good men die? Why protect the Chechen all these years? There's only one way to get those answers. Thomas nodded. We go to Fort Bragg, we walk into Blackwood's office, and we make him tell us everything. The drive back to North Carolina took 4 hours. Thomas spent them in silence, thinking about Ghost, about the journal entries that painted a picture of a man who knew something was wrong, who suspected betrayal but went on the mission anyway. Pride, Blackwood would probably say. But Thomas knew better. It wasn't pride, it was duty. Ghost went to Laos knowing he might die because that's what warriors did. They stood between the bad things and the good people, even when the good people betrayed them. Fort Bragg looked the same as always. Young soldiers training, veterans teaching, the machinery of war continuing its endless cycle. Thomas showed his credentials at the gate, drove to Special Operations Command headquarters, parked in a visitor spot. Patricia touched his arm. "You sure about this? Blackwood is powerful, connected. He could make us disappear." He could try. Thomas checked his phone, made sure the encrypted files were backed up to 3 different locations. "But I sent copies of everything to journalists, to congressmen, to veteran organizations. If anything happens to us, the truth comes out." Insurance policy, something I learned from Ghost. Thomas opened his door. Always have a backup plan. General Harold Blackwood's office occupied the top floor of Special Operations Command headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ranges where America's deadliest warriors trained. The general stood at those windows now, watching young soldiers become killers, his reflection in the glass showing a man in his mid-70s who had survived 5 wars and countless secrets. He didn't turn when Thomas entered. Didn't need to. He had been expecting this visit since the moment Hayes died. "Close the door, Mercer." Blackwood's voice carried the authority of 40 years commanding men in impossible situations. "We both know why you are here." Thomas closed the door, moved into the room with the controlled patience of a sniper approaching a hide. The office was exactly what he expected. Flags and plaques, photographs with presidents and generals, the trappings of a career spent in shadows, making decisions that never appeared in official records. "You betrayed Phantom Strike." Thomas didn't sit, didn't relax, kept his body between Blackwood and the exit. "You told the Chechen we were coming." Blackwood finally turned from the window. His face was lined and weathered, but his eyes were sharp, calculating, showing no remorse. "That's an interesting accusation. You have proof?" "I have Ghost's journal, Hayes' testimony before he died, and classified files that show you were the only person with access to Phantom Strike's mission details and means to contact Soviet intelligence networks." Blackwood smiled, thin and cold. "Circumstantial at best. You're a civilian now, Mercer. You have no authority here, no jurisdiction. All you have is grief and conspiracy theories." Thomas pulled out his phone, set it on Blackwood's desk. On the screen was a recording, audio only, but the voices were clear. Hayes in his final moments telling Thomas everything. The betrayal, the evidence Ghost had found, the proof that someone in MACV, SOG command had sold out the team. That's not admissible in any court. Blackwood didn't touch the phone, and even if it was, you'd never get it in front of a judge. National security would bury it. "I'm not going to a judge." Thomas picked up the phone. "I'm going to every journalist, every veterans organization, every congressman who ever served. I'm going to burn your legacy to ash." Blackwood walked to his desk, sat down with the casual ease of someone who had weathered threats before. "You won't do that, because if you expose me, you expose Ghost. You expose what Phantom Strike really was. A black operation to eliminate a Soviet advisor and retrieve classified intelligence. Your father wasn't a hero, Mercer. He was an operative working outside official channels. He was a Marine following orders. Your orders. Orders I gave because I was told to give them." Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "You think I'm the top of this chain? I was a colonel then, a mid-level officer doing what I was told by people whose names you'll never know. Ghost Mercer died because men in Washington decided certain targets in Laos were worth the risk. I just executed their policy." Thomas felt rage build hot and fierce in his chest, but he kept it controlled, channeled it the way Ghost had taught him. "Anger made you sloppy. Anger got you killed." "Why did you tell the Chechen we were coming?" "Because I was ordered to." Blackwood's face was stone. "The mission was always compromised, Mercer. We needed Mikhail Volkov to think he was winning, to get overconfident, to expose his network. Your father and his team were assets in a larger operation. You sacrificed 12 men for intelligence gathering. I sacrificed 12 men to potentially save thousands. That's command, Mercer. That's the ugly mathematics of war. Your father understood that. He went in knowing the odds were bad. He went anyway because he was a professional." Thomas thought about Ghost's journal, about those final words. "Tell my son some things are worth dying for." Had Ghost known he was being sacrificed? Had he gone into Laos understanding the mission was betrayed from the start? "Did he know?" Thomas asked quietly. "Did Ghost know it was a trap?" Blackwood's expression shifted slightly. something that might have been regret crossing his weathered features. I told him the night before they inserted, gave him the choice to abort. He said if Mikhail Volkov was going to be there, he wanted to be there too. Said it was personal. Because the Chechen had killed his teammates. Because the Chechen was better than him. Blackwood stood, walked to a shelf lined with photographs. He pulled one down, showed it to Thomas. It depicted 12 men in jungle fatigues, Ghost Mercer at the center, Hayes beside him, young and alive and unbroken. Your father was the best sniper I ever saw, Blackwood said. But Mikhail was better. Ghost knew it, hated it. The mission to Laos wasn't just about following orders. It was about proving he was still the best. Pride killed your father, Mercer. Same pride that's driving you now. Thomas stared at the photograph, seeing Ghost's face, young and confident and doomed. Was Blackwood right? Had Ghost gone to Laos knowing it was suicide, choosing it anyway because his ego couldn't accept being second best? You're lying. Thomas set the photo down. Ghost stayed behind to save his team. Hayes told me. Ghost stayed behind because he had no choice. Blackwood's voice was hard. Mikhail outmaneuvered him, outshot him, outthought him. Your father's last act was getting his men out alive. That's honor, Mercer. That's sacrifice, but it doesn't change the fact that he lost. Then why is the Chechen still hunting Mercers? Why kill David? Why target the memorial? Because Mikhail Volkov is exactly like your father. Blackwood returned to his desk. He can't let it go, can't accept that it's over. He won in Laos, but winning wasn't enough. He needs to erase Ghost's entire legacy, needs to prove he was superior in every way. And you've been helping him. Thomas leaned forward, hands flat on the desk. All these years feeding him information, making sure he could kill everyone who survived Phantom Strike. Number Blackwood met his eyes directly. I've been tracking him, trying to stop him. The deaths over the past 10 years, I investigated everyone, tried to warn people. But Mikhail is patient, thorough. He waits years between operations, makes them look natural, leaves no evidence. Then help me stop him now. I can't. Blackwood's voice carried genuine regret. The memorial ceremony is presidential-level security, Secret Service, FBI, every agency you can imagine. If I flag Mikhail Volkov as a threat, they'll cancel the event. Thousands of veterans will lose their moment of recognition. Or worse, they'll flood the area with security and Mikhail will just wait. Pick another time, another place. Kill more people. So we do nothing? We do what snipers do best. Blackwood pulled out a file, slid it across the desk. We wait. We watch. And when he shows himself, we take the shot. Thomas opened the file. Inside were surveillance reports, financial records, communication intercepts. Years of intelligence on the Volkov family, compiled meticulously, showing a pattern of operations across multiple continents. Mikhail and Alexei working together, father teaching son, building towards something big. The memorial is their masterpiece. Blackwood pointed to a highlighted section. I have assets tracking them, but they're ghosts, literally. They appear, complete a mission, disappear, but this time they can't disappear. This time they have to be there, in person to finish it. And when they appear, you want me to kill them. I want you to do what Ghost couldn't. Blackwood's voice was quiet. When? Thomas studied the old general's face, looking for deception, finding only weary honesty. Blackwood was a man who had made terrible choices, who had sacrificed good people for strategic gains, who had lived with those decisions for 50 years. But he wasn't lying about this. He wanted the Chechens stopped as much as Thomas did. I need resources. Thomas closed the file. Equipment, intelligence, access to the memorial security plans. You'll have everything I can provide without triggering oversight. Blackwood opened a drawer, pulled out a key card. This gets you into the Tactical Operations Center. Full access to all security measures, communication networks, surveillance feeds. Officially, you're a consultant on veteran protection. And unofficially? Unofficially, you're the last line of defense if everything goes wrong. Blackwood handed him the card. The Secret Service will have counter-sniper teams. FBI will have tactical units. But if Mikhail gets through them, if he gets in a position, you're the only one who might stop him. Why me? Why not your own people? Because you're Ghost's son. Blackwood's voice carried absolute certainty. You have his skills, his patience, his ability to make the impossible shot. But more than that, you have what he lost in Laos, perspective. You're not doing this for pride or revenge. You're doing it to protect people. That makes you better than Ghost ever was. Thomas pocketed the keycard, picked up the file. I'll stop them. Both of them. I know you will. Blackwood extended his hand. Your father would be proud. Thomas ignored the hand, turned toward the door. My father would have put a bullet through you 50 years ago. Probably. Blackwood lowered his hand. But he would have understood why I gave the orders I gave. That's the difference between soldiers and civilians. Soldiers understand that sometimes you sacrifice the few to save the many. Thomas paused at the door. Hayes told me something before he died. Said Ghost figured out who betrayed the mission. Said he had proof. What happened to that proof? I destroyed it. Blackwood's admission was calm. Ghost found evidence that the betrayal went higher than me. Names that would have destabilized intelligence operations across multiple theaters. I couldn't let that information survive. Too many ongoing missions at risk. So you let good men die to protect bureaucrats and power structures. I let good men die to protect the system that keeps this country safe. Blackwood's voice hardened. You don't have to like it, Mercer. You don't have to forgive me, but you need to understand that war isn't clean. Never has been. Never will be. Thomas left without another walked out of Special Operations Command into the North Carolina afternoon and felt dirty in a way that had nothing to do with sweat or dust. Blackwood was right about one thing. War wasn't clean. It was ugly and complicated and full of impossible choices. Ghost had made his choice in Laos. Hayes had made his choice protecting students. David had made his choice investigating the truth. Now it was Thomas's turn to choose. The team assembled at a safe house outside Fort Bragg, a contractor facility that Blackwood had arranged, secure and private. Morrison was there, arm still bandaged from the West Virginia operation. Mendez had healed faster, already moving with his usual fluid grace. Patricia Cole looked tired, shadows under her eyes from weeks of investigation and loss. Sophia Reyes stood by the window, staring out at nothing, thinking about whatever young warriors thought about when old men's wars consume their lives. Thomas spread Blackwood's files across the table. This is everything the intelligence community has on Mikhail and Alexei Volkov. 15 years of surveillance compiled by agencies most people don't know exist. Patricia leaned over the documents, scanning quickly with practiced eyes. This is impressive. Financial records, communication intercepts, travel patterns. Someone's been watching them very closely. Blackwood, Thomas pointed to the signature on several reports. He's been tracking them since the early 2000s. Claims he's been trying to stop them. Do you believe him? Morrison asked. I believe he wants them stopped. Thomas pulled out a map of Washington, D.C., marked with the memorial's location. Whether he's been actively trying or just monitoring from a distance, I don't know. But he gave us access to the security planning. That's something. Sophia turned from the window. What's the security setup? Thomas overlaid a tactical map on top of the city plan. Secret Service has the primary perimeter. FBI tactical teams on all high ground within 1,000 yards. DC Metro Police handling crowd control. Estimated 20,000 attendees, including high-level government officials. That's a nightmare for security, Mendez observed. Too many people, too many variables, which is exactly why the Chechen chose it. Patricia highlighted several buildings surrounding the memorial, but he's not going to attack the crowd. He's going to target specific people. The families of Phantom Strike team members. How many families will be there? Morrison's voice was grim. Thomas pulled out a list. 8 families, wives, children, grandchildren of the men who died in Laos, plus relatives of Hayes, Raymond Cole, and Victor Cross. We're looking at potentially 40 to 50 targets. The Volkovs can't eliminate 50 people before security responds, Sophia said. Even if they're that good. They don't need to eliminate 50. Thomas marked several positions on the map. They need to kill enough to make their statement. 10, maybe 15. Create chaos, cause maximum trauma, then disappear in the confusion. So how do we stop them? Morrison asked the question they were all thinking. Thomas studied the map, running scenarios in his head, thinking like a sniper, like Ghost, like someone who had spent 40 years understanding the mathematics of death. The Chechen would need elevation, concealment, and escape routes. He'd need a position that gave him sightlines to the memorial while staying outside the Secret Service perimeter. There, Thomas pointed to a building 700 yards from the memorial, Old office complex, mostly vacant, perfect height. That's where I'd set up. Patricia was already pulling up building schematics on her laptop. 8 floors, roof access, clear lines to the memorial grounds. FB will have it covered. I will. Of course they will. Thomas smiled without humor, which means that's not where the Chechen will be. He'll expect us to expect the obvious position. He'll choose something else. Mendez studied the map. What about here? He pointed to a construction site 600 yards southeast. Partially completed building, lots of access points, chaos that makes surveillance difficult. Possible. Thomas considered it. Or here. He indicated a hotel 500 yards north. High-end, lots of guests, easy to blend in as a civilian. We can't cover every possible position, Morrison said. We need to narrow it down, so we think like them. Patricia stood, walked to the window, looked out at Fort Bragg in the distance. Mikhail is old, mid-70s. He'll want a position that doesn't require a lot of climbing or physical exertion. Alexei is younger, more mobile. They might split up. Father takes the secure position with the easier shot. Son takes the harder position with the difficult escape. Thomas nodded. That fits their pattern. Mikhail is methodical, patient. Alexei is aggressive, takes risks. Together, they cover each other's weaknesses. So we're looking for 2 positions, Sophia said. One conservative, one bold. And we have 3 months to find them. Thomas looked at each face. 3 months to scout every building, every rooftop, every position within 1,000 yards of that memorial. 3 months to think like the Chechen and figure out where he'll hide. Morrison cracked his knuckles. Then we better get started. They spent the next 12 weeks living in Washington, D.C., rotating through hotels and safe houses, becoming invisible in the city's rhythm. Every day, they scouted positions. Every night, they analyzed patterns. Thomas became intimately familiar with the memorial's surroundings, could close his eyes and picture every building, every angle, every possible shot. Patricia ran background checks on every person with access to buildings overlooking the memorial. Maintenance workers, security guards, office employees, hotel staff, looking for anomalies, for people who didn't quite fit, for the ghosts hiding in plain sight. Mendez cultivated sources in the local community, talking to homeless people and street vendors and anyone who noticed patterns in the city's daily life, who came and went, who didn't belong. The small details that professional surveillance missed. Morrison and Sophia established counter-sniper positions, mapping out where they would set up to cover the memorial, where they could engage targets if the Volkovs appeared, running scenarios and contingencies until every possibility had been explored. And Thomas watched, waited, thought like Ghost, like the Chechen, like someone who had spent a lifetime understanding that patience was more deadly than any rifle. 6 weeks before the ceremony, Patricia found something. A building permit for renovations on an office complex 800 yards from the memorial. The company doing the work was a shell corporation with ties to a Russian business network that Mikhail had used before. They're setting up their hide now. Patricia showed Thomas the permit. Renovating a specific office on the 7th floor, supposedly for structural improvements. But look at which office. Thomas studied the blueprints. The office faced directly toward the memorial with floor-to-ceiling windows. Perfect sightlines, perfect concealment behind construction equipment and tarps. That's Mikhail's position. Thomas felt certainty settle in his bones. Conservative, methodical, exactly what we'd expect. Which means Alexei will be somewhere else, Sophia said. Somewhere we wouldn't expect. They intensified their search, focusing on positions that seemed wrong, that violated conventional sniper doctrine. Too close, too exposed, too risky. The kind of position a young shooter with something to prove might choose. Morrison found it 3 weeks before the ceremony. A maintenance tunnel system beneath the memorial itself, originally built during construction, officially sealed but accessible through a forgotten entrance in a nearby parking garage. He could shoot from underground? Sophia was skeptical. The angle would be terrible, not if he uses a periscope rifle system. Morrison pulled up technical diagrams. Special forces use them in urban operations. Lets you shoot from complete concealment, around corners, through small openings. Alexei could be literally under their feet, and they'd never see him. Thomas studied the tunnel system, following its paths on the map. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was exactly what someone trying to surpass his father's legacy would attempt. So we have 2 positions. Patricia marked them on the map. Mikhail in the office building, Alexei in the tunnels. How do we stop both? We don't. Thomas made the decision Ghost would have made. We let them set up. We let them think they're in control, and then we take them simultaneously. That's risky, Morrison said. If we miss either one, people die. If we try to stop them early, they disappear and try again later. Thomas's voice was firm. This ends at the memorial. Both of them. Final. The team spent the final 3 weeks preparing. Sophia would cover the office building, positioned in a hotel 600 yards away, with a clear shot through Mikhail's window. Morrison would be in the tunnels, hunting Alexei in the darkness, close quarters combat where rifles became liabilities. Patricia would coordinate with FBI and Secret Service, feeding them intelligence without revealing the full plan, keeping official security focused on protecting the crowd while Thomas's team hunted the hunters. Mendez would be mobile, ready to respond to whichever situation went wrong first. The wild card, the backup plan, the insurance policy. And Thomas would be on the memorial grounds themselves, concealed among the crowd, the last line of defense if everything failed. The closest target, the most dangerous position, the place where Ghost had taught him a real warrior stood. Between the bad things and the good people. The night before the ceremony, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat in his hotel room, cleaning his rifle, the same Remington 700 he had carried across multiple deployments and conflicts. The rifle was familiar, honest, incapable of deception. Pull the trigger, bullet flies, target dies. Simple mathematics. His phone rang. Patricia. Can't sleep either? Her voice was tired but alert. Thinking about Ghost. Thomas ran a cleaning patch through the barrel, wondering what he would do in my position. The same thing you're doing. Patricia paused. The right thing. How do you know it's right? We're planning to execute 2 people without trial, without oversight. That's not justice. That's something else. It's protection. Patricia's voice was firm. Mikhail and Alexei have killed dozens of people over 50 years. They're planning to kill more tomorrow. Stopping them isn't revenge. It's necessity. Thomas thought about that, about the difference between justice and necessity, about the choices Ghost had made in Laos, the choices Blackwood had made sending men to die, the choices Hayes had made staying behind to protect students. In the end, it all came down to the same question. What were you willing to sacrifice to protect others? Get some rest, Gray. Patricia's voice softened. Tomorrow's going to be hard. You need to be sharp. You too. After the call ended, Thomas returned to cleaning his rifle. Outside, Washington, D.C. was alive with activity, preparing for tomorrow's ceremony. Inside, Thomas Mercer was preparing for war. But as he worked, a thought occurred to him. Something Blackwood had said about Mikhail, that he couldn't let it go, that winning wasn't enough. What if the Chechen was as tired as Thomas was? What if 50 years of war had worn him down the same way it had worn down everyone else? What if there was another way to end this? Thomas set down his rifle and pulled out his phone, opened the encrypted files on Mikhail Volkov, studied the photographs, the surveillance reports, the pattern of a man who had spent half a century being hunted and hunting in return, and began to formulate a plan that Ghost never would have considered. A plan that might get him killed, or might finally end the war. The morning of April 20th dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made you believe in new beginnings. 20,000 people gathered at the memorial grounds, families and veterans and dignitaries, all there to honor those who had died in wars most Americans preferred to forget. Thomas Mercer moved through the crowd in civilian clothes, a baseball cap and sunglasses making him anonymous. Unremarkable. Just another middle-aged man paying respects. His rifle was concealed in a guitar case, broken down and ready for rapid assembly. 3 minutes from ordinary citizen to deployed sniper. Sophia was in position in the hotel, watching Mikhail's office through her scope. Morrison was in the tunnels, hunting Alexei in the darkness. Patricia was with FBI command, monitoring communications. Mendez was mobile, blending into the crowd 30 yards from Thomas. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. The ceremony began at 1000 hours. Speeches from generals and senators, music from military bands. The reading of names, thousands of them, warriors who died far from home for reasons that seemed less clear with every passing year. Thomas scanned the crowd, looking for threats, for anything out of place. His earpiece crackled with updates from the team. Sophia's voice, calm and professional. No movement in the target building. Windows still covered with construction tarps. Morrison, slightly breathless from moving through tight spaces. Tunnel system is extensive, still clearing sections. No contact yet. Patricia, coordinating with official security. Secret Service reports all clear. FBI counter snipers report no threats visible. Everything was too quiet, too perfect. Thomas felt unease settle in his gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 4 decades of war. Something was wrong. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. A photograph. The image showed Sophia through her own scope, crosshairs centered on her head. The angle suggested someone shooting from above and behind, from a position they hadn't scouted. Below the photo, a message in English with Russian phrasing. Your father made same mistake in Laos. Thought he knew where I would be. Thought he was hunting me. He was wrong. You are wrong. Watch your team die. Then I kill you last. Like Ghost. Thomas was moving before he finished reading, thumbing his radio, shouting into the mic. Sophia, move! You're compromised! The shot came before she could respond. Thomas heard it even over the crowd noise. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle. His earpiece filled with Morrison's voice, urgent and scared. Sophia's down! Repeat, Sophia is down! Thomas felt time slow, felt the world narrow to critical details. The Chechen wasn't in the office building. Had never been there. It was a decoy, a misdirection, exactly like the West Virginia compound. And they had fallen for it. Which meant Alexei wasn't in the tunnels either. Morrison, get out of there! Thomas was running now, pushing through the crowd, heading for the hotel. It's a trap. They're not where we thought. Where are they? Patricia's voice was tight with controlled panic. Thomas reached the hotel entrance, showed his contractor ID to Secret Service, took the stairs 3 at a time. He knew where they were now, understood the pattern. The Volkovs weren't targeting the memorial itself. They were targeting Thomas's team. Killing them one by one, saving Thomas for last, making him watch everyone die the way Ghost had watched his team die in Laos. Morrison, you need to answer me. Thomas reached the 6th floor, heard gunfire above. Morrison! Nothing. Just static. Then Patricia's voice, breaking protocol, emotion cracking through her professional calm. I just lost contact with Mendez. Last position was near the memorial's north entrance. Secret Service is responding to shots fired. Thomas hit the 7th floor, saw the hotel room door open, saw Sophia on the floor in a spreading pool of blood. He checked her pulse, found it weak but present. The shot had hit her shoulder, not her head. Professional wounding, keeping her alive long enough to suffer. He grabbed her radio, her rifle, her ammunition, everything useful. Then he moved to the window, looked across at the office building they had been watching for weeks, and saw nothing. Just empty windows and construction equipment and the perfect position that nobody was using. They weren't targeting the memorial. They were targeting us. Thomas keyed his radio. Patricia, pull back. Get FBI to evacuate the families. This whole thing is misdirection. Gray, what's happening? Patricia sounded lost, a feeling Thomas understood intimately. We're being hunted. Thomas scanned the surrounding buildings, looking for the real sniper position, the place he should have anticipated. The Chechen is better than us, better than Ghost, and he's proving it by destroying everyone I care about. His radio crackled, a new voice, accented but clear. Very good, Thomas Mercer. You understand now. Your father never understood. Even at the end, he thought he could win. Thought his training, his skill, his reputation would overcome any obstacle. I taught him otherwise. Now I teach you. Mikhail. Thomas kept scanning, kept searching. Where are you? Everywhere. Nowhere. Like Ghost your father wanted to be. Mikhail's voice carried dark amusement, but beneath it, Thomas heard something else. Weariness, exhaustion, the weight of 50 years. But I am real Ghost. You are just old man with rifle, watching friends die, knowing you cannot stop it. You sound tired, Mikhail. Thomas said it gently, testing. 50 years is a long time to fight. Silence on the line. Then quieter, I am tired. So tired. But I cannot stop. Your father is dead. Your son is dead. Your friend Hayes is dead. I have won everything. But winning is not enough. It is never enough. Thomas saw movement. A reflection in a window 4 buildings away. Position nobody had scouted because it was too far, too difficult, beyond the range most snipers would attempt. But not beyond the range of someone who had been making impossible shots for 50 years. I see you, Thomas said quietly. No, you see where I was. Mikhail's voice held that tired amusement again. I am already moving, always moving. This is lesson your father never learned. Stand still and die. Keep moving and survive. But surviving is not living, Thomas. Your father knew how to live. I only know how to survive. The admission hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thomas heard it clearly now. The exhaustion, the desperate need for this to be over. Mikhail Volkov wasn't a monster. He was a man trapped in a war he couldn't end, killing because it was all he knew how to do. The radio went dead. Thomas stood in the hotel room beside Sophia's unconscious body and felt the full weight of his failure. He had been outmaneuvered, outthought, used exactly the way Ghost had been used in Laos. The pattern repeating across generations, sons making the same mistakes as fathers, the cycle endless. But there was one difference. Ghost had died in Laos. Thomas was still breathing, which meant he could still fight, could still hunt, could still finish this. He assembled Sophia's rifle, a newer model than his but familiar enough, grabbed her spare magazines, checked the chamber. Then he moved to the window and did what he had been trained to do since childhood. He disappeared, became invisible, became the ghost his father never quite managed to be, and began hunting the Chechen the way Mikhail had been hunting Mercers for 50 years. With patience, with precision, with the absolute certainty that one of them would die today. But as Thomas moved through the city, tracking the ghost who had killed his family, another thought occurred to him, the plan he had formulated last night, the one Ghost never would have considered. What if he didn't hunt Mikhail? What if he gave him something else? Thomas pulled out his phone, sent a text to the number Mikhail had used. Simple, direct. Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, Hayes's grave. 1 hour. Come alone. No weapons, just two old men talking. The reply came 30 seconds later. Why would I do this? Because we're both tired. Because this war has lasted 50 years and consumed everyone we love. Because maybe there's another way to end it. There is no other way. Only winning or losing. Then come and win. Thomas sent the final message, face to face, old warrior to old warrior. The way it should have ended in Laos. No response. Thomas waited, watching the phone, wondering if Mikhail would take the bait, wondering if he even wanted him to. This could be the end. Could be the moment where one of them finally achieved the victory that had eluded them for half a century. Or it could be something else entirely. His phone buzzed. 1 hour. But if this is trap, everyone you love dies. Not quick, slow. Thomas pocketed the phone and headed for Arlington. The cemetery was quiet at midday, most visitors at the memorial ceremony downtown. Thomas arrived early, scouted the area, confirmed he was alone. Then he walked to Hayes's grave, still fresh, earth dark, temporary marker waiting to be replaced with permanent stone. He knelt beside it, placed his hand on the cold ground and spoke words only Hayes could hear. I'm sorry, Bulldog. Sorry I got you killed. Sorry I'm about to do something you'd probably call insane. But I can't keep fighting this war. Can't keep watching good people die for old men's hatred. So I'm going to try something different. Something Ghost never would have done. I'm going to offer mercy. The morning was silent except for bird song and the distant hum of DC waking up. Beautiful and peaceful, the calm before whatever storm was coming. Thomas heard footsteps on gravel, turned slowly, hands visible and empty. No weapons, no threat. Just an old man at a grave. Mikhail Volkov walked toward him, moving with the careful precision of someone who had survived by never making mistakes. He was exactly as his photograph showed, aged but not diminished. A man who had been forged in Soviet gulags, in Southeast Asian jungles, and every hard place the Cold War had created. His face was weathered, lined, showing 75 years of war and survival. But his eyes were what struck Thomas. Not cold, not calculating, just tired. So incredibly tired. Mikhail stopped 10 feet away, hands also visible and empty. You came unarmed. So did you, Thomas gestured at the grave. This is where they buried my father's best friend, the last man who survived Laos besides you. I know, I killed him. Mikhail's voice carried no pride, only statement of fact. He was teaching young soldiers to be snipers. To be like your father, like me. I could not allow that. Why? Thomas stood, keeping his hands visible. Why not let it end? Ghost is dead. David is dead. Hayes is dead. You won, Mikhail. You beat the Mercer legacy. So why keep fighting? Because winning is not enough. Mikhail's accent seemed heavier now, or maybe exhaustion made it harder to maintain the perfect English. Your father took something from me in Laos, not my life. Something more important. What? My belief that war could end. Mikhail moved closer, just 5 feet now, separating them. Before Laos, I thought if I just fought hard enough, won enough battles, proved myself superior, the war would end. I would be allowed to rest. But your father taught me that war never ends. It just finds new soldiers. Ghost believed the same thing. Thomas thought about the journal, about Ghost's final words. He thought some men were born for war, that it was our nature. And you? What do you believe? Thomas looked around Arlington at the thousands of graves, the endless evidence of America's wars. I believe we have a choice. I believe we can choose to end it. Not by winning, by walking away. Walking away is surrender. Walking away is survival. Thomas met Mikhail's eyes. You said it yourself. Stand still and die. Keep moving and survive. But what if surviving means moving away from the war instead of through it? Mikhail was quiet for a long moment, studying Thomas's face. You are not like your father. No, I'm not trying to be better than you. I'm trying to be smarter. Ghost went to Laos trying to prove something, trying to win. He lost because winning was never possible. The game was rigged from the start. You're General Blackwood. Mikhail nodded. He told me you were coming, gave me your approach routes, your call signs, everything. I thought it was Soviet intelligence triumph. Later, I learned the truth. Your own leaders sacrificed you, and you were the weapon they used. Thomas took a step closer. But you're not a weapon, Mikhail. You're a man who's been fighting for 75 years, a man who's tired. Mikhail's face shifted, something cracking in the armor he had built around himself. I am so tired, Thomas. So tired of killing, so tired of running, so tired of being monster. But I do not know how to be anything else. Then let me show you. Thomas extended his hand. Put down the war, walk away, let it end. And if I do, if I surrender, what happens to me? You leave. Thomas kept his hand extended. 24 hours to get out of the country. After that, I can't protect you, but you'll have a chance to die as a man instead of a ghost. And Alexei, my son? Alexei makes his own choice. Thomas's voice was firm. But he'll know his father chose peace over revenge. That has to count for something. Mikhail stared at Thomas's hand for a long moment. The old sniper's shoulders sagged, decades of killing finally breaking through whatever armor he had built around his heart. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, tears began to track down his weathered face. I killed your son, your father, your friend. I have taken everything from you. And you offer me mercy? I offer you the same thing I want. Thomas's hand remained steady. An end to the war. A chance to die peacefully instead of violently. A choice that Ghost and David and Hayes never got. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of 50 years and countless deaths and the terrible momentum of war that had consumed both their families. And then Mikhail Volkov did something he had not done in half a century. He took Thomas's hand. The old sniper's grip was strong despite his age, the handshake of a warrior acknowledging another warrior. And Thomas Mercer, Ghost's son, David's father, the last of his line, held that hand and felt something fundamental shift. The war was ending, not with a shot, with a choice. Patricia's voice came in through the earpiece, confused and alarmed. Gray, what are you doing? I'm tracking you at Arlington. There's someone with you. Do you need backup? Stand down. Thomas didn't release Mikhail's hand. The threat is over. But the target is right there. Patricia's professional training warred with confusion in her voice. We can take him. End this. Number Thomas looked at Mikhail, saw the exhaustion and relief and desperate hope in the old man's eyes. We already ended it. Thomas released Mikhail's hand, stepped back. You have 24 hours. After that, every intelligence agency in the world will be hunting you. But if you're smart, if you're as good as you've proven to be, you'll disappear. Really disappear. Not as a ghost, as a man. Mikhail nodded slowly. And you, what will you do? Go home to Montana. Thomas thought about his gunsmith shop, about the quiet life he had tried to build. Teach some kids to shoot, fix some rifles. Try to remember what normal feels like. That sounds nice. Mikhail's voice carried genuine wistfulness. I had a shop once, in Moscow, before the war. I made furniture, beautiful things, useful things. Maybe you can again, maybe. Mikhail turned to leave, then paused. Thomas, your father was great warrior, but you are something better. You are wise warrior. That is rare. He walked away, moving through Arlington's graves, past the markers of men who had died in wars just and unjust, past the evidence of America's endless conflicts. He did not look back. Thomas stood beside Hayes's grave and felt something shift inside him. The weight that had been pressing on his shoulders since David died, since Hayes died, since he found out about ghost sacrifice, it lifted slightly. Not gone, never gone, but bearable. Patricia appeared beside him, materializing from concealment, rifle still ready, but lowered. You let him go. I let him choose. Thomas knelt again, placed his hand on Hayes's grave. There's a difference. Morrison is going to think we're insane. Patricia's voice carried concern, not judgment. Morrison can think what he wants. Thomas stood. Bulldog, I didn't get revenge, didn't kill the man who killed you, but I did something better. I ended the war. I let the ghost rest. Movement in the distance. Thomas tensed, hand moving toward the weapon he wasn't carrying, but then relaxed. Alexei Volkov stood among the graves watching his father walk away. The younger man held a rifle, not aimed, just carried. His face showed confusion, pain, and something that might have been relief. Their eyes met across the distance. Thomas saw the question there. Should I finish what my father could not? Thomas shook his head slowly. Enough. For a long moment, Alexei stood frozen between duty and humanity, between the legacy his father had created and the peace his father had just chosen, between being the weapon he was trained to be and being the man he might still become. Then Alexei Volkov lowered his rifle, turned, and walked away into the dawn. Patricia exhaled slowly. This will end my career, but some things matter more than careers. Thomas turned to her. Some things matter more than revenge, too. What do we tell the others? Sophia's in the hospital. Morrison and Mendez are wounded. They need to know something. We tell them the truth. Thomas started walking toward the parking lot. That we chose to break the cycle instead of continuing it. That we chose mercy over vengeance. And if they can't accept that, they can report us. And if Blackwood finds out, he already knows. Thomas thought about the general's words, about sacrifice and difficult choices and the ugly mathematics of war. Blackwood will understand. He might not approve, but he'll understand. They drove back into Washington, D.C., past the monuments and memorials, past the physical evidence of America's wars. Thomas thought about Ghost, buried in Section 60, finally at rest after 50 years. Thought about Hayes, fresh in the ground, sacrifice complete. Thought about David, whose investigation had led here, to this moment, to this choice. And he thought about the choice itself, not revenge, not justice, just mercy. The hardest thing a warrior could give. The hardest thing to accept. 3 months later, Thomas Mercer stood in his Montana gunsmith shop, teaching a 16-year-old girl the fundamentals of precision shooting, breathing, trigger control, patience. All the skills Ghost had taught him passed on to a new generation. The girl made her first 500-yard shot, whooped with joy, reminded Thomas of David at that age. Did I do it right? She was practically bouncing. You did perfect. Thomas smiled, genuine and free. Now do it again. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. No words, just a photograph. It showed Mikhail Volkov standing on a beach somewhere warm, sun on his face, actually smiling. Behind him, barely visible, was Alexei. Together, alive, at peace. And in the background, barely noticeable, what looked like a furniture workshop. Thomas deleted the photo, put the phone away, returned his attention to teaching. The war was over. The ghosts were quiet. And for the first time in 3 generations, a Mercer could shoot without killing. That evening, Thomas locked up his shop, drove home to the small house he had bought with his military retirement, and sat on his porch watching the Montana sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. His rifle leaned against the wall, cleaned and empty, ready for hunting season, but nothing more. The mailbox at the end of his driveway held a letter, official military seal, addressed in formal script. Thomas opened it and found a Medal of Honor citation, posthumous, for Ghost Mercer. Recognition for actions in Laos, December 1975. Declassified after 50 years, finally acknowledged. And beneath it, a handwritten note from General Blackwood. Your father's sacrifice is now part of the official record. He died a hero, not a casualty. You gave him that by choosing peace over revenge. Thank you for being better than all of us. Thomas folded the letter, placed it in his father's journal, Next to Ghost's final words. Some men are born for war. His father had believed that, had raised Thomas to believe it. But Thomas had learned something different. Some men are born for war, but all men can choose peace. He sat on his porch until the stars came out, until the night grew cold, until Montana wrapped around him like a blanket. And for the first time since David died, Thomas Mercer slept peacefully. The last marksman had come home. The war was over. The ghost could rest. And in a cemetery in Arlington, and in mountains of Laos, and in all the places where warriors fell, the dead finally knew peace, because the living had chosen mercy. And mercy, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. I've researched hundreds of military stories, but Thomas Mercer's choice at Arlington Cemetery still haunts me. Here's a man who earned his revenge, 3 generations of loss, 50 years of hunting, and at the moment of victory, he chose something harder than pulling the trigger. He chose to end it. What would you have done? Could you offer mercy to the man who killed your son, your father, your best friend? Drop your thoughts below. And if this story moved you the way it moved me, there are more warriors waiting to have their stories told. Hit subscribe. Let's honor them together.